This video will help you sleep and relax. But before we begin, I would like to know which city you're from and what time you're watching this. Now, subscribe to the channel, relax, and let's begin. I've lived in Wavecrest my entire life. It's one of those small seaside towns where everyone knows each other, where the sound of waves crashing against the shore becomes the soundtrack to your childhood. The beach has always been my second home. I'm 19 now, and I can't even count how many summer days I've spent swimming in those waters, or how many bonfires I've had with friends on cool autumn nights. But there's something about Wavecrest after dark that changes, something I can't quite explain. I never really believed in the supernatural. Growing up, I'd laugh at ghost stories and roll my eyes when my grandma would talk about spirits in the water. But after what happened last year, I'm not so sure anymore. It was Halloween night, the sky was clear, and a full moon hung over the water, casting this eerie silver glow across the beach. Me and 4 of my friends, Jake, Mia, Tyler and Drew, decided to walk along the shore after a party at Jake's place. We were all pretty sober. I'd had maybe 1 beer the whole night. Halloween in Wavecrest is usually pretty tame. Some trick-or-treaters, a few decorations, nothing special. We were just walking, throwing rocks into the water, joking around. It must have been around 11:30 when I noticed them, a group of people standing in a circle about half a mile down the beach, near the rocky outcrop that separates our main beach from the private section. "Hey guys, check that out," I said, pointing toward them. At first, it just looked like another group having a late-night beach hangout, but as we kept walking, I could make out that they were wearing what looked like white cloaks or robes. There were maybe 7 or 8 of them. "What the hell are they doing?" Tyler asked, squinting to get a better look. We slowed down, still walking toward them, but more cautiously now. The moonlight was bright enough that we could see they were gathered around some kind of flat stone or platform, like an altar or something. And there was this black cat that kept trying to walk away, but each time it did, one of them would pick it up and place it back on the stone. "Dude, this is some weird shit," Drew whispered. Mia grabbed my arm. "Connor, I don't like this. Let's go." I felt this coldness wash over me that had nothing to do with the night air. Something felt wrong. Really wrong. The way they were standing, so still, so focused on whatever they were doing. It wasn't normal. "Yeah," I agreed. "Let's head back." We turned around and walked quickly back toward town. No one said much, but I could feel everyone was freaked out. I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see them following us, but they stayed where they were. The next morning, I woke up to my phone blowing up with texts. There had been a boat accident overnight. A small fishing boat had crashed into the rocks not far from where we'd seen those people. The guy who died, Mark Sutton, was someone I knew. Not well, but he'd been a senior when I was a freshman, and his dad owned the bait shop where I'd worked summers. I couldn't stop thinking about the timing, those people in white, the ritual or whatever it was, and then Mark's accident just hours later. When I mentioned it to my friends, Jake thought I was crazy for connecting the two, but Mia and Drew admitted they'd been thinking the same thing. That was weird enough, but what happened last month is what really has me questioning everything. It was a warm night for April, and the same group of us decided to head down to the beach. We'd been talking about different myths and legends earlier that day. Mia had been researching jinns for a world mythology class she was taking at community college. "They're like these ancient spirits made of smokeless fire," she explained as we sat on our usual spot, a cluster of driftwood logs about a quarter mile from the pier. "They can take human form or appear as shadows." "That's bullshit," Tyler said, throwing a stick into our small fire. "No offense, but all that supernatural stuff is just stories people made up before they understood science." I was only half listening to their debate. Something had caught my eye further down the beach, a dark figure standing near the waterline. At first, I thought it was just someone taking a late-night walk, but something seemed off about it. "Hey, do you guys see that person down there?" I asked, pointing. Everyone squinted in the direction I was pointing. "I don't see anyone," Drew said. No, there's definitely someone there, I insisted. Look, about 100 yards down, near where the beach curves. They all looked again. I still don't see anything, Jake said, sounding annoyed. Me neither, Mia added, but I could see it clearly. A human-shaped figure, completely black, darker than the night around it. And it wasn't moving like a normal person would. It was just standing there. I'm going to check it out, I said, standing up. Dude, what are you doing? Tyler asked. There's nothing there. I'm telling you, I can see someone. I started walking toward the figure, and after a moment's hesitation, my friends followed. As we got closer, maybe 50 yards away, Mia gasped. Wait, I see it now, she said, her voice suddenly tense. Yeah, me too, Drew added. What the hell is that? By this point, Jake and Tyler could see it too. We all slowed down but kept moving forward, drawn by curiosity and that weird compulsion you get sometimes to investigate something scary. When we were about 30 yards away, I realized what was bothering me so much about the figure. Everything on a nighttime beach has different shades of darkness. The sand looks gray in moonlight. People appear as varying shadows depending on what they're wearing. But this was just pure black. Not like someone wearing black clothes. It was like a hole cut out of reality. A silhouette with no features, no definition, just absolute darkness. We got closer, maybe 12 feet away, and that's when it turned toward us. I say turned, but it didn't move like a person turns. Its whole form just shifted, and suddenly, what seemed to be its head was facing our direction. I couldn't make out any eyes, any face at all, just that solid black shape against the night. I felt my heart racing. The air around us seemed colder, heavier somehow. No one was speaking. We were all just frozen there, staring at this thing that shouldn't exist. Then, because I'm an idiot, and that's what I do when I'm scared, I screamed, "Ah!" and started running back toward our bonfire, partly as a joke to break the tension, partly because I was genuinely freaked out. The others followed, laughing nervously, except for Mia. When we got back to our spot, she was pale, her hands shaking. It followed us, she said quietly. What? No, it didn't, Jake argued. It just stood there. No, Mia insisted. When Connor started running and you guys turned to follow him, I looked back. It moved toward us, fast, but when I turned fully around to look at it, it stopped. You're just freaking yourself out, Tyler said, but he didn't sound convinced. What was that thing? Drew asked, looking back down the beach. The figure was gone now. We spent the next hour arguing about what we'd seen. Tyler thought it was just some drug addict who'd wandered onto the beach. Jake suggested it was someone playing a prank, but neither explanation made sense. How could a person appear so completely, unnaturally black? Why couldn't we see any features, any clothing details, even from just 12 feet away? Remember what I was saying about jinns? Mia said quietly. How they can appear as shadows. Come on, Jake scoffed. You're not seriously suggesting we saw some kind of mythological spirit. Then what was it? I asked. I've lived here my whole life, been on this beach at night hundreds of times. I've never seen anything like that. We didn't stay much longer after that. The mood was ruined, and honestly, none of us wanted to be on the beach anymore. As we walked back to the parking lot, I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see that black silhouette following us. That was 3 weeks ago. We haven't been back to the beach at night since then. Jake and Tyler still insist it was just a person, maybe someone wearing some kind of costume or full-body suit. Drew's on the fence. Mia refuses to talk about it at all now, changes the subject whenever it comes up. But I can't stop thinking about it, about how utterly wrong it looked, about how it seemed to be watching us, about Mia's insistence that it started to follow us. The other day, I was driving along the coastal road at sunset, and I glanced down at the beach. For a split second, I thought I saw that same black figure standing at the shoreline. When I slammed on my brakes and looked again, it was gone, if it was ever there at all. I don't know what we saw that night. I don't know if it's connected to those people in white robes from Halloween or to Mark's death. or to any of the other strange things I've noticed over the years living in this town. All I know is that something's not right with Wavecrest Beach after dark. I haven't told anyone else about this. Who would believe me? But I know what I saw, and sometimes, when I'm lying in bed at night with my window facing the ocean, I swear I can feel something out there, watching, waiting, something that doesn't belong in our world, and I'm terrified that one night it's going to come looking for me. Story 2: I've never talked about this publicly before. I'm still not sure what happened that night, and honestly, I'm not sure I want to know. Some of my colleagues have tried to forget it, others have left the department altogether, but I feel like I need to get this off my chest, even anonymously. I was the lead dispatcher at Montgomery County Emergency Services in Pennsylvania. December 14th, 2013. That date is burned into my memory forever. It was supposed to be a routine overnight shift. Me, Catherine, Tobias, and Alicia manning the dispatch center from midnight to 8 a.m. These overnight shifts were usually pretty quiet. A few drunk drivers, maybe a domestic, the occasional medical emergency, nothing we couldn't handle. The trouble started around 1:30 in the morning. Tobias noticed it first. Some weird static on a few of our radio channels. Not completely unusual, especially in bad weather, but it was clear that night. No storms, no interference that we could think of. "Hey Kath, you hearing this?" Tobias called over to me, adjusting his headset. I remember walking over to his station and listening. It wasn't just random static, it had this pattern to it, almost like whispering but not quite words, just on the edge of being understandable. "Probably just interference from somewhere," I said, but I didn't believe it myself. Something about it felt off. By 1:42, it wasn't just strange anymore. The entire system went dead, complete communication blackout, all channels, all radios, nothing in, nothing out. We had procedures for this. First, we tried the backup systems, nothing. Then the emergency protocols, still nothing. We called the tech team, but it was the middle of the night, and they'd need time to get in. That's when the real nightmare began. We couldn't transmit or receive anything at the dispatch center, but officers started calling in on their cell phones reporting something impossible. They were hearing transmissions that seemed to be coming from us, except we weren't sending anything. Officer Chen called first. I'll never forget how shaken she sounded. "Catherine, why is dispatch asking about Emma's leukemia treatment?" she asked, her voice trembling. My blood ran cold. Emma was Sarah's 6-year-old daughter, who had been diagnosed with leukemia 3 months earlier. But here's the thing, Sarah had kept it completely private. She'd only told her supervisor why she needed the time off. Not even her patrol partners knew, certainly not me or any of the other dispatchers. "Sarah, we're not transmitting anything. The system's down completely," I told her. But I just heard it. A voice that sounded like Tobias asked me if Emma's latest treatment was working, or if we were considering the experimental protocol at Children's Hospital. I looked over at Tobias, who was staring at his dead console. He shook his head. He hadn't transmitted anything. Before I could process this, another call came in. Officer Thomas Reynolds. He was in a panic. "What the hell kind of joke is this?" he demanded. "Why is Alicia telling me that Karen is at the Westfield Hotel with some guy right now, room 217? Karen was his wife. Alicia had never met her. Alicia was sitting right in front of me, trying desperately to get our system back online. She looked up, confused when I mentioned her name. "I didn't say anything about anybody's wife," she said, bewildered. By this point, my head was pounding, not just from stress, a physical pain behind my eyes that came on suddenly and intensely. Tobias and Alicia reported the same thing, nausea, dizziness, and then we started hearing it too, through our dead headsets, whispers, fragments of conversations. Some I recognized from earlier in the shift, but others were from weeks ago, months ago. I distinctly heard Officer Miller requesting backup at a domestic disturbance on Elm Street. Officer Miller had died in a car accident 2 years earlier. More calls kept coming in from officers, each one more disturbing than the last. The voices from dispatch were telling them personal things. Secrets, private information, things that were impossible for us to know. Officer Jenkins heard a dispatch voice calmly describing his teenage son's internet search history in explicit detail. Officer Williams was directed to an address where, the voice claimed, his brother was overdosing right at that moment. His brother had been clean for 5 years. Every officer who called was experiencing the same thing. The radio system that should have been completely dead was targeting them with personalized psychological warfare. Around 2:30, I noticed Tobias was getting worse. His face had gone completely white and he was staring at his headset with a look of absolute terror. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold his phone. "They know," he whispered. "They know what I did." Before I could ask him what he meant, he ripped off his headset, stood up so fast his chair crashed to the floor, and walked out. Just walked straight out without another word. Alicia tried to go after him, but I told her to stay put. We couldn't leave the center unmanned, even if our systems were down. I called security to look for him. They found him 10 minutes later in the parking lot, sitting in his car, staring straight ahead. He wouldn't respond to questions, wouldn't even blink, just sat there, completely catatonic. They had to call an ambulance to take him to the hospital. As far as I know, he never returned to work after that night. At exactly 2:58 a.m., I remember looking at the clock. Everything came back online, just like that, as if nothing had happened. All systems normal, the headaches, the nausea, they vanished as quickly as they'd appeared, but it wasn't over, not even close. The technical investigation afterward revealed something that still gives me nightmares. Our system had continued recording during the outage. Every minute of those 76 minutes was logged. When they played back the recordings, what they found defied explanation. Thousands of overlapping conversations. Not just from that night, but fragments of radio traffic going back years. Officers who had retired, officers who were dead, all mixed together in a chaotic mess of sound. And between these fragments were pieces of private conversations, things said in officers' homes, in their cars when they weren't on duty, private phone calls, intimate moments. I listened to some of it during the investigation. I heard myself telling my sister about my miscarriage 2 years earlier. A conversation that happened in my living room, nowhere near any police equipment. The technical team was baffled. The FBI sent specialists. They tore the entire system apart looking for bugs, for hacks, for anything that could explain it. They found nothing. No evidence of external intrusion. No malfunction that could explain what happened. Dr. Eleanor Webb led the investigation. I remember her final briefing. She looked exhausted, defeated. She said, "The system appears to have been accessing and transmitting data that by all technical understanding it should not have had access to." That was it. That was their conclusion. In other words, we have no idea what happened. The county decommissioned the entire communications system the following month. Brand new equipment, barely a year old, millions of dollars, all scrapped. No one wanted to touch it. No one wanted to use it. Most of us stayed on. What else could we do? But things were never the same. We don't talk about that night. We pretend it didn't happen. But sometimes I'll catch another dispatcher staring at their headset with a look of distrust. And I know they're thinking about it too. Tobias never came back to work. Last I heard, he was still in psychiatric care, still not speaking about what he heard that night. Alicia transferred to another department 6 months later. She said she couldn't stand the sound of radio static anymore. As for me, I still jump when I hear unusual static on the radio. I've unplugged every smart device in my home. I don't own a digital assistant. I cover my laptop camera because whatever happened that night, whatever was in our system, it was listening. It had been listening for a long time, and it knew things it shouldn't have known. The FBI implemented new protocols for incidents like ours. They never publicly acknowledged what happened, but I've heard rumors of similar events at other emergency service centers across the country. Brief moments where the technology turns against the people using it, where it reveals it's been watching, listening, learning. Most people think technology just does what we tell it to do. That night taught me differently. Sometimes I think about all the devices around us, all the systems we rely on, all the networks connecting everything. And I wonder, are they really just machines, or is there something else living in the wires, in the signals bouncing through the air? I don't know. I don't want to know. All I know is that for 76 minutes on December 14th, 2013, something spoke through our radios. Something that knew us better than we knew ourselves. And I'm terrified it's still out there, listening, waiting for its next chance to speak. Story 3. I've been sitting on this story for almost 2 years now, debating whether to share it. I'm finally writing it down because I still think about it every time I see a shadow in my peripheral vision or when I'm alone in my apartment at night. What happened at Greenwood Cemetery in Spokane still messes with me, and I need to get it off my chest. This happened back in October of 2021. My friends and I had been talking about doing something creepy for Halloween season. I'm usually the one pushing for this kind of stuff. I've always been into paranormal investigation shows and urban legends. My friends Sam, Alyssa, and Derek would humor me, but they were never as into it as I was. I'd heard about Greenwood Cemetery from some locals at the coffee shop where I worked. They called it the 1,000 Steps Cemetery because of this long staircase at the entrance that supposedly had 1,000 steps. It doesn't, we counted later. It's like 70-something. The legend was that if you counted the steps going up, you'd get one number, but counting down, you'd get a completely different number. People also said they'd see figures walking between the gravestones at night, hear whispers, or feel someone touching their shoulders when no one was there. So I suggested we check it out, and somehow convinced everyone to come along. I also suggested, and this is where I made my big mistake, that we bring a Ouija board. We'd used one a couple times before at Sam's place, but nothing ever happened except Alyssa obviously pushing the planchette to freak Derek out. We drove out there around 8 at night. It was chilly but not freezing, typical Washington October weather. The cemetery entrance was this old stone archway with those famous steps leading up to it. As we got out of the car, I remember noticing how quiet it was. No traffic noise, no animals, nothing, just dead silence. "I don't like this already," Derek said, looking up at the stairs. "Come on, it's just stairs," I replied, trying to sound braver than I felt. I had the Ouija board in my backpack along with some flashlights and my camera. We started climbing the steps, I won't lie. They were creepy as hell. Old stone steps with moss growing on them, surrounded by trees on both sides. The higher we climbed, the more isolated it felt, like we were walking into another world. About halfway up, Alyssa started counting out loud, and we all joined in. We counted 73 steps in total. The cemetery itself was huge and old. Some of the gravestones dated back to the 1800s, all worn and tilting. The moon was bright enough that we didn't need our flashlights much, which somehow made it worse. All those shadows moving slightly whenever clouds passed overhead. We walked around for maybe 20 minutes, reading epitaphs and taking a few pictures. I was honestly a little disappointed. No ghosts, no weird feelings, nothing but an old cemetery. Then Alyssa wanted to take some photos by this ornate angel statue. "Jordan, go stand next to it. I want to get a picture of you with it," she said. I went over and posed while Sam took the picture with my camera. Alyssa joined me for a second photo. When Sam handed the camera back, I immediately checked how they turned out. That's when everything changed. In the first picture, right behind me, was what looked like a tall, dark figure. It wasn't solid, more like a shadow with vague human features, standing maybe a foot behind me. The worst part was that it seemed to be leaning slightly toward my shoulder. "What the hell is that?" I said, showing them the picture. Everyone crowded around to look. Derek immediately took a step back. "That's not funny, Jordan. Did you Photoshop that before we came?" "What? No. Sam just took this picture." I was starting to feel that cold fear in my stomach. We all looked behind the statue. Nothing was there that could explain the shadow. No trees, no other statues, nothing. I took another picture of the same spot, empty, then another with Alyssa standing where I had been. Nothing unusual appeared. "Maybe it was just a weird shadow or a smudge on the lens," Alyssa suggested, but she didn't sound convinced. Let me see it again, Sam said, taking the camera. That doesn't look like a smudge to me. It looks like a person. I felt sick. The figure was so clearly standing right behind me, and I hadn't felt anything at all. Let's go back to the entrance, Derek said. This place is giving me the creeps. We headed back toward the gates, but I couldn't stop thinking about the picture. Near the entrance was this large circular cement area, probably 15 feet across. It looked like it might have been the foundation for something once. This seems like a good spot, I said, taking off my backpack. Good spot for what? Sam asked. The Ouija board. Come on, we came all this way. They all looked at me like I was insane. After that picture? No way, Alyssa said. That's exactly why we should. Maybe we can find out what that thing was. I was already pulling out the board. Looking back, I don't know why I was so insistent. It wasn't like me to push when everyone was clearly uncomfortable. But I felt compelled to do it, like I needed answers. You guys don't have to participate. Just watch if you want. They reluctantly agreed to stay, but none of them would touch the board. I set it up in the middle of the cement circle and sat cross-legged in front of it. The moonlight was bright enough that I could see the letters clearly. I placed my fingers lightly on the planchette and began the usual questions. Is there anyone here who wants to communicate with us? The planchette moved smoothly to yes. I assumed it was me subconsciously moving it since I was the only one touching it. What's your name? It circled around the board once, then went to yes again. That's not a name, I said. Can you tell us who you are? It moved to the letter U. U, like the letter U or you? I asked. It circled U again, then moved to yes. Something felt off. My head was getting foggy, like I was slightly drunk. I should have stopped right there, but instead I kept going. Are you the same entity that appeared in our photograph? Yes. Why did you appear behind me in the picture? The planchette circled U again, then yes. By this point, my friends were getting visibly nervous. Jordan, this isn't right, Sam said. It keeps giving the same answers. I barely heard him. I felt disconnected, like I was watching myself from outside my body. My fingers seemed glued to the planchette. What do you want from us? I asked. It spelled out you again. Do you want me specifically? I asked, my voice sounding distant even to myself. Yes. Alyssa grabbed my arm. Jordan, stop it right now. This isn't funny. I'm not doing anything, I mumbled, but I couldn't look away from the board. Is there something you want to tell me? I asked the board. The planchette moved faster now, circling you repeatedly, then yes, then you again. Derek suddenly reached over and swiped the planchette off the board. That's enough. The moment my fingers lost contact with the planchette, it was like waking up from a trance. A wave of anxiety hit me so hard I actually gasped. My hands were trembling, and I felt cold sweat running down my back. What the hell, Jordan? Sam was staring at me. Why did you keep going when it was obviously targeting you? I don't know, I said, and I genuinely didn't. I wasn't thinking clearly. It was like I couldn't stop. We packed up quickly after that. Nobody spoke much as we headed back down the steps. Alyssa counted them again. 73, same as before. In the car, Sam kept looking at me in the rearview mirror. That wasn't like you at all, he said. You're usually the first one to call it quits if something feels off. I know, I replied, still feeling shaken. It was like I couldn't think straight once I touched that thing. The way it kept circling you and yes, Alyssa shuddered. It was like it was fixated on you. Did you guys feel anything weird when we were up there? I asked. Derek shook his head. Just scared when we saw that picture, but you looked like you were in some kind of trance. We checked the photo again when we got back to my apartment. The figure was still there, clear as day. It wasn't a trick of the light or a smudge. It was a dark, human-shaped shadow standing directly behind me, leaning slightly toward my right shoulder. I didn't sleep that night. I kept thinking about how foggy my mind had been, how compelled I'd felt to continue using the board despite everyone's objections. That wasn't me. I'm normally super cautious about this stuff. I always insist on saying goodbye properly on Ouija boards and following all the rules. But we never said goodbye that night. Derek just knocked the planchette off, and we left. For weeks afterward, I expected something to happen. I thought I'd see shadows in my apartment or feel a presence, but nothing ever did. No nightmares, no strange occurrences, nothing moved around my apartment. Life just went on. But I still think about it. I still have that picture, though I keep it buried in a folder on my old laptop. Sometimes I wonder if whatever was in that cemetery is just waiting. Maybe it didn't follow me home because it's patient. Maybe it got what it wanted already, or maybe it was just a weird shadow in my mind playing tricks on me. But then I remember how I felt using that Ouija board, that foggy, detached feeling, how I kept going despite everyone telling me to stop, how that thing kept circling you and yes over and over. I don't know what happened at Greenwood Cemetery that night, but something was there with us, something that knew my name before I ever said it, something that wanted me specifically, and sometimes I still feel like it's watching me. Story 4. I still can't sleep right after what happened in the Shadowcrest Mountains 3 weeks ago. I'm writing this down, hoping it might help me process everything, because I seriously haven't been able to stop thinking about it. Maybe someone here has experienced something similar or can offer some explanation that makes sense. It was supposed to be our last adventure before college scattered us across different states. Me, Ryan, Jess, and Matt have been friends since freshman year of high school, and with summer ending, we wanted one final trip together. We'd done plenty of hiking before, but nothing like what Ryan had planned for us. Ryan showed up at our usual meeting spot at the diner with this old, worn-out map he'd found online through some obscure forum. He was practically bouncing with excitement as he spread it across the table, nearly knocking over my coffee. "Guys, this is perfect," he said, pointing to an unmarked area in the Shadowcrest Range. "There's this forest that's not on any official trails. The post said it's supposedly haunted." Jess rolled her eyes. "Haunted? Really, Ryan?" "I don't believe in that stuff either," Ryan replied, "but the pictures looked amazing. Pristine forest, untouched, and it's secluded. Perfect for our last hurrah." Matt seemed hesitant. "Is it even legal to hike there?" "It's not restricted land," Ryan assured us. "Just unexplored. People avoid it because of the stories." I remember asking what stories, and Ryan's face lit up. He said locals reported hearing whispers in the woods, seeing figures that vanished when approached, and experiencing unexplainable cold spots, the typical ghost story stuff that I never really believed in. We all laughed it off. None of us were the superstitious type, so we agreed. One last adventure before real life took over. We packed our gear that afternoon and set off early the next morning. The drive took about 3 hours, winding through increasingly remote roads until Ryan pulled his Subaru onto a dirt path that barely qualified as a road. We hiked for another 2 hours before even reaching the area marked on Ryan's map. The forest was beautiful in an unsettling way. The trees were ancient, with thick, gnarled trunks and a canopy so dense that only scattered beams of sunlight broke through. Moss covered everything, and the air felt heavier somehow, filled with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. The whole place was eerily quiet, no birds singing, no insects buzzing, just the sound of our footsteps and breathing. We'd been hiking for about 4 hours when I first saw it. We were taking a break by a small stream, refilling water bottles and checking the map. I wandered a few feet away to stretch my legs when I felt this weird sensation, like a cold draft on the back of my neck. When I turned around, I saw something standing between 2 distant trees. A dark, humanoid figure just watching us. It was too far away to make out any features, but I could feel its gaze. "Guys," I called out, my voice shaking slightly. "Do you see that? Over there." By the time they looked up, it was gone, just vanished. "See what?" Jess asked, shading her eyes. "Nothing, I guess," I mumbled. "Thought I saw someone watching us." Matt laughed nervously. already getting spooked by Ryan's ghost stories. I tried to laugh it off too, but something felt wrong. That sensation of being watched didn't go away, even as we continued hiking. I kept glancing over my shoulder, scanning the trees, but saw nothing else. We set up camp in a small clearing as the sun was setting. Ryan got a fire going while Jess and Matt pitched the tents. I was supposed to be gathering more firewood, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. Every time I ventured a few yards into the trees, that cold sensation would return, raising goosebumps on my arms despite the summer heat. Night fell quickly in the forest. We sat around the campfire, telling jokes and reminiscing about high school, trying to ignore the oppressive darkness surrounding our little circle of light. Around 10 o'clock, in the middle of one of Matt's stories, we all fell silent simultaneously. There were whispers coming from the darkness beyond our campsite, not just one voice, but many, overlapping in a soft, unintelligible murmur. "Do you guys hear that?" Jess whispered, her face pale in the firelight. We all nodded. The whispers seemed to be coming from all directions, surrounding us completely. "It's probably just the wind," Ryan said, but his voice wavered. There was no wind that night. The air was completely still. The whispers grew slightly louder, still impossible to understand, but clearly not natural forest sounds. Matt grabbed his flashlight and stood up. "I'm going to check it out," he said, trying to sound brave. "Don't," I pleaded, but he was already stepping toward the edge of the clearing. Matt swept his flashlight beam across the trees. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then he froze, the beam fixed on something about 20 yards away. "Holy shit," he breathed. We all looked. Standing between two trees was a figure, pale and slightly translucent, with hollow, dark eyes. It didn't move or make any sound, just stared at us with those empty sockets. Matt dropped the flashlight and scrambled backward. The beam hit the ground, and when it rolled back up, the figure was gone. We all rushed into our tents, zipping them shut as if thin nylon could protect us from whatever was out there. Jess and I shared one tent, Ryan and Matt the other. I could hear Matt's panicked breathing from across the campsite. "What the fuck was that?" Jess whispered, her voice shaking. "I don't know," I said, clutching my sleeping bag tight around me. "I don't know." The whispers continued all night, sometimes fading to almost nothing, sometimes growing loud enough that they seemed just outside our tent. None of us slept. We just lay there, paralyzed with fear, listening to those unintelligible voices in the darkness. When the first gray light of dawn filtered through the tent fabric, we immediately started packing up. No one mentioned what had happened. We just silently agreed to get the hell out of there as fast as possible. The whispers had stopped with the sunrise, but that feeling of being watched was stronger than ever. We skipped breakfast, stuffing our gear haphazardly into our packs. No one wandered off alone. We stayed within arm's reach of each other as we broke camp. The forest seemed different in the daylight. The trees closer together, the paths less distinct. Ryan checked his map repeatedly, looking increasingly confused. "The trail should be right here," he muttered, turning the map different angles. "Let's just head downhill," Matt suggested, his voice strained. "We'll hit a road eventually." We started walking, following what looked like a game trail through the undergrowth. After about 20 minutes, we rounded a bend and stopped dead in our tracks. Standing in the middle of the path, about 30 feet ahead, was the figure from the night before. In daylight, it was even more terrifying, a humanoid shape that seemed to be made of pale mist, with those same hollow eye sockets staring directly at us. It didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there blocking our way. Jess grabbed my arm so hard her nails dug into my skin. "Do you see it?" she whispered. We all saw it. For several heartbeats, no one moved. Then the figure raised one arm, pointing deeper into the forest, away from the direction we were heading. Matt was the first to break. "Fuck this," he gasped, and bolted to the right, crashing through the undergrowth. We followed without hesitation, running blindly through the trees. The whispers started again as we ran, louder now, coming from all around us. I risked a glance back and saw nothing following. But when I looked forward again, I caught glimpses of pale shapes moving between distant trees, always just at the edge of my vision. We ran until our lungs burned, stumbling over roots and rocks. Ryan fell hard at one point, cutting his hand on a sharp stone. We pulled him up and kept going, the whispers always just behind us, beside us, ahead of us. I don't know how long we ran or how far. Time seemed to stretch and distort in that forest. Eventually we burst out of the trees onto a dirt road, not the one we'd parked on, but a road nonetheless. Ryan's car was nowhere in sight. "Which way?" Jess panted, looking frantically in both directions. "Left," Ryan decided. "Downhill. It has to connect to the main road eventually." We started jogging down the dirt road, too afraid to stop, but too exhausted to keep running full out. The whispers had faded when we left the trees, but that sensation of being watched remained. After about a mile, the dirt road merged with a wider gravel one, and after another half-mile, we hit pavement. Ryan recognized a landmark, an old rusted mailbox, and realized we were about 2 miles from where we'd parked. When we finally reached his car, we threw our packs in and piled inside, locking the doors. Ryan's hands were shaking so badly he could barely get the key in the ignition. As we pulled away, I looked back at the forest edge. It was there, the pale figure, standing just within the tree line, watching us leave. As we drove away, it raised its hand again, this time in what almost looked like a wave. We didn't speak for most of the drive home. What was there to say? We'd all seen it, heard the whispers, felt the presence. When we finally did talk, we tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was an elaborate prank by locals. Maybe we'd been affected by some kind of natural gas or fungal spores that caused hallucinations. But I know what I saw, what we all saw. The worst part is, I still feel watched. Sometimes when I'm alone in my room at night, I hear those whispers again, faint but unmistakable. And twice now, I've glimpsed a pale figure outside my window, gone when I looked directly at it. I don't think we escaped that forest. I think whatever was there followed us home, and I don't know what it wants. Has anyone else experienced anything like this? Please, if you have any information or similar encounters, let me know. I'm afraid to go to sleep tonight. Story 5. I never believed in ghosts. Even living next to a Civil War graveyard for nearly 6 years, I'd roll my eyes whenever friends would ask if our house was haunted. My husband Mark and I bought the place because it was affordable in a good school district, and honestly, the cemetery made for quiet neighbors. We have 2 dogs, Rusty, a golden retriever, and Milo, a beagle mix, who never showed any signs of sensing anything unusual. No random barking at empty corners, no refusing to enter certain rooms. Nothing that would make me think twice about our decision to live here, until last Saturday. It was just after 7:30 in the evening. Mark was working late, so I decided to take the dogs for their usual walk before it got too dark. The weather was warm but not unbearable, typical for early June in our area. I put on my shorts, a light t-shirt, laced up my sneakers, and grabbed my small backpack with water, my phone, and poop bags. The dogs were excited as always, wagging their tails and jumping around while I clipped on their leashes. Our route is pretty standard, first around the elementary school across from the graveyard, then several laps around the cemetery itself. The school playground was empty that evening, which wasn't unusual for a weekend. The cemetery, with its weathered headstones dating back to the Civil War era, looked the same as it always did. Peaceful, quiet, just a piece of history in our neighborhood. We were on our 5th lap around the cemetery when I felt it, a slight tug on the back of my shirt. I turned around, thinking Milo's leash had gotten caught somehow, but both dogs were walking calmly beside me. I dismissed it as my imagination, or maybe the fabric catching on something. About 20 steps later, I felt a distinct sensation of weight being placed in my backpack. It wasn't heavy, just noticeable enough that I stopped walking. The dogs looked up at me, confused by the sudden halt. I slipped off my backpack and was shocked to find it unzipped. I always double-check that it's closed because Rusty once got into it and ate an entire pack of gum, which led to an expensive emergency vet visit. I searched through the backpack but found nothing new inside. At this point I started feeling uneasy, but I'm a rational person. I told myself I must have forgotten to zip it up, and the weight change was just the contents shifting. The dogs were getting restless, so we finished our lap and headed home. By the time we reached our house, I had convinced myself nothing strange had happened. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across our front yard. I unclipped the dogs' leashes, filled their water bowls, and decided to take a shower to cool off. The bathroom in our house is pretty basic. White tiles, a combination shower, tub, and a small window high on the wall that lets in some natural light but maintains privacy. I turned on the water, undressed, and stepped into the shower, leaving the bathroom door slightly ajar, as I always do when Mark isn't home, so I can hear if the dogs need anything. About 5 minutes into my shower, I started feeling dizzy and nauseous. My first thought was heat exhaustion. Maybe I'd pushed myself too hard on the walk. I switched the water from warm to cool, hoping it would help. That's when I felt it. Something scraped down the middle of my back, from between my shoulder blades to my lower back. It wasn't painful exactly, more like someone dragging a fingernail down my spine with moderate pressure. I spun around, heart racing, but of course no one was there. The shower curtain hadn't moved, and I could see through the clear parts that the bathroom was empty. Still, the sensation was so real that I reached back to feel if I had somehow scratched myself. My skin was smooth, no marks that I could feel. Thoroughly freaked out now, I quickly shut off the water and reached for my towel on the hook just outside the shower. It wasn't there. Neither were my clothes. I distinctly remembered placing them on the closed toilet lid, but they were gone. The bathroom door, which I'd left ajar, was now closed. I stood there dripping wet and completely naked, frozen with fear. After a few seconds of panic, I told myself there had to be a logical explanation. Maybe the dogs had nudged the door closed, and somehow my clothes had fallen behind the toilet. I stepped out of the shower, checked behind the toilet, nothing. Checked under the sink, nothing. Now I was getting genuinely scared. I went to open the bathroom door, but the handle wouldn't turn. It wasn't locked. Our bathroom doesn't even have a lock, but it felt like someone was holding it from the other side. I pulled harder, using both hands, and suddenly it gave way, swinging open so forcefully that I stumbled backward. The hallway was empty. No dogs, no clothes, just the usual pictures on the walls and the hardwood floor stretching toward the bedrooms. I ran to my bedroom, wet footprints trailing behind me, and slammed the door shut, locking it immediately. Within seconds, both Rusty and Milo were scratching at the door, whining to be let in. I opened it just enough to let them through, then locked it again. They were acting strange, tails tucked, ears back, and both of them were making low growling sounds while staring at the door. Rusty, who never growls at anything, positioned himself between me and the door. Milo jumped on the bed and continued growling, his eyes fixed on the same spot. I grabbed the throw blanket from the foot of the bed to cover myself and reached for my phone on the nightstand to call Mark. It wasn't there. Then I remembered. It was in my backpack, which I'd left by the front door. Outside my bedroom, I heard a strange sound, a high-pitched whining noise that wasn't coming from either of my dogs. It rose and fell in pitch, almost like someone trying to imitate a siren but doing it poorly. Then I heard what sounded like an old man laughing. Not a jolly laugh, but a creepy, wheezing chuckle that made the hair on my arms stand up. The dogs went crazy, barking and growling at the door. I was shaking so badly I could barely hold the blanket around me. The laughter stopped, and for about 2 minutes there was complete silence, except for the dogs growling. Then something hit my bedroom door, hard, a single thud that made both dogs jump back and made me scream. Then silence again. I don't know how long I sat there, wet and shivering with 2 terrified dogs and nothing but a blanket. It felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes. Eventually, I worked up the courage to call out, "Hello, is someone there?" No response. The dogs had stopped growling, but were still on high alert. I needed clothes and my phone, and most importantly, I needed to know if someone was in my house. I found an old baseball bat Mark keeps under the bed, wrapped the blanket tighter around me, and slowly unlocked the door. When I opened it, My backpack was lying on the floor directly in front of the door, as if someone had thrown it there. It hadn't been there when I ran into the bedroom. I'm absolutely certain of that. With trembling hands, I picked it up and unzipped it. Inside were red, white, and blue flowers, the kind someone had placed on several graves for the upcoming 4th of July. I recognized them from our walk. They were slightly wilted but unmistakably from the cemetery. My phone was still in the side pocket, untouched. I dropped the backpack and vomited right there in the hallway. When I could breathe again, I grabbed my phone and called Mark, begging him to come home immediately. I was so hysterical he could barely understand me, but he promised to leave work right away. While waiting for him, I found clean clothes in my dresser and put them on, never letting go of the bat. The dog stayed right by my side, still on edge but no longer growling. When Mark got home, he searched the entire house but found nothing out of the ordinary. No signs of a break-in, all windows and doors locked from the inside. The only strange thing was my clothes. They were found neatly folded on our bed, which I swear was empty when I ran in there after my shower. We checked our security cameras, which cover the front door, back door, and driveway. The footage showed nothing unusual until the moment my backpack hit the bedroom door. It appeared on camera as if it had been thrown from an angle where a person would have been visible, but there was no one there, just the backpack suddenly flying through the air and hitting the door. The weird part is that the footage glitched just before this happened. About 2 minutes of static, then the backpack hitting the door, then normal footage resumed. It's been 5 days now. I haven't been able to sleep properly. Every night I dream of a dark figure standing at the foot of my bed, laughing that same wheezing laugh. I wake up drenched in sweat, convinced someone is in the room with me. The dogs won't go near the cemetery anymore. They pull in the opposite direction when we try to walk that way. I don't know what happened that night. I don't know if something followed me home from the graveyard or if it's been here all along, just waiting for the right moment. I don't know if it's gone now or if it's still here, watching me as I type this. All I know is that I'm not a skeptic anymore. Now I understand the possibilities of what lies unseen, and I'm terrified. Story 6. I've never really told this story to many people. It's not that I'm afraid they won't believe me. I just don't know what to make of it myself. But I've been carrying this around for years now, and I guess writing it down might help me process it. I grew up in suburban Manchester, in a typical semi-detached house. Our neighbor was a man named Jack, a railway worker in his early 50s who lived alone. When I was younger, I remember my parents describing him as a bit of a recluse. He wasn't unfriendly, just private. He'd give a polite nod if you passed him on the street, but that was about it for the first few years we lived there. That started to change when I was around 10. I was in our front garden kicking a football around when it went over the fence into Jack's yard. I was terrified, not because Jack was scary, but because kids have this weird anxiety about retrieving balls from neighbors' gardens. My dad saw me hesitating and told me to just knock on Jack's door and ask politely. When Jack answered, he wasn't annoyed at all. He actually invited me in to see something he thought I might find interesting. My dad came with me, safety first and all that, and that's when we discovered Jack's workshop. It was bloody amazing. He'd built this entire workshop in his back garden with a proper coal-fueled steam boiler that powered all sorts of contraptions. He was a genius with mechanical stuff. After that, Jack became almost like an unofficial uncle. He'd invite me over to see his latest projects, and sometimes my parents would join us for tea. He taught me about tools, showed me how steam power worked, and even let me help with small repairs. For a kid obsessed with how things worked, it was heaven. This went on for years, and Jack became a fixture in our lives. He was still quiet with most people, but with us, he opened up. I think he was just lonely and appreciated having people who were genuinely interested in his passion. When I was 16, there was this massive thunderstorm one night, the kind where the rain comes down so hard you can barely see through it, and the thunder is so loud it makes your windows rattle. I remember sitting in our living room with my parents, watching the storm and feeling grateful to be inside. The next morning, my dad woke me up with this look on his face I'll never forget. Jack had died during the night. He'd had a heart attack on the pavement between our houses. The police said it looked like he'd been trying to reach our door when it happened. What made it worse was when my parents realized something that haunted them for years afterward. During the storm, they'd heard banging on the wall we shared with Jack's house. They'd thought it was just something loose being blown by the wind, or maybe a branch hitting the house. But now they realized it had been Jack trying to get our attention, probably feeling the heart attack coming on and trying to reach us for help. We were all devastated. Jack didn't have much family, just a distant cousin who handled the funeral arrangements. His house sat empty for almost 3 years before it was finally sold to a young couple with a baby. I was 19 by then and in my first year at uni, but I still lived at home and would sometimes babysit for the new neighbors when I was around. They were nice people, Sarah and Mike, and their baby girl was about 8 months old. They'd renovated quite a bit of Jack's old house, though they kept some of the original features that gave it character. One night in October, I was babysitting while Sarah and Mike went out for their anniversary. It was around 9 in the evening, and the baby had gone down easily. I was sitting in their living room watching MTV with the volume turned low so I wouldn't wake her. The house was quiet except for the muted music from the telly. Then I heard it. It sounded exactly like someone tapping notes on a small wooden table about 6 feet away from me. The table was a circular side table made of dark wood, one of the few pieces of furniture they'd kept from the previous owner. The tapping wasn't random. It had a distinct pattern, almost musical, like someone playing a simple tune by tapping their fingers. At first I thought it might be the house settling or something normal like that, but it continued, and it was too rhythmic, too deliberate. Tap, 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 tap. It went on for about 15 seconds. What made it even weirder was Sarah and Mike's cat. She had been sleeping on the sofa next to me, but when the tapping started, she immediately sat up, ears perked, and stared directly at the table. She didn't seem scared, just intensely focused, like she was watching someone, but there was nobody there. I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up. It wasn't just fear, it was this odd sensation like someone had walked over my grave. My whole body went cold, and I couldn't move for those 15 seconds. I just sat there watching the empty space by the table as the tapping continued. When it finally stopped, the silence felt heavy. The cat continued staring at the table for a few more seconds before eventually settling back down, which somehow made it even more unsettling. After I managed to pull myself together, I went over to the table and examined it. There was nothing on it that could have made the noise, just a small plant in a ceramic pot that hadn't moved. I tried tapping my own fingers on the table, and it made exactly the same sound I'd heard. The wood had this distinct resonance to it, but I couldn't recreate the variation in notes or the rhythm. It had been too complex, too intentional. I checked the entire house, locked all the doors again, made sure the windows were secure, peeked in on the baby who was still sleeping peacefully. Everything was normal. There was absolutely no explanation for what I'd heard. The rest of the night passed without incident, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I hadn't been alone in that room. I kept the telly on louder than I probably should have, just to fill the silence. When Sarah and Mike came home, I didn't mention anything. What would I say? I think your table was playing music by itself. They'd think I was mental. Here's the thing. I wasn't terrified by it. Unsettled, yes, but not scared in the way you'd expect, because almost immediately I had this thought about Jack, about how he used to tap out rhythms on his workbench when he was thinking, about how he died trying to reach us during a storm, possibly feeling abandoned in his final moments, about how that table might have been from his house originally. I never experienced anything like that again, even though I babysat for them several more times. But I've never forgotten it either. The memory hasn't faded at all. I can still hear that tapping sequence perfectly in my head, even now, years later. Sometimes I wonder if it was just my imagination, or maybe some weird acoustical thing with the pipes or the house structure. But then I remember the cat staring at the exact spot where the sound was coming from, and I know I didn't imagine it. I've tried to be rational about it. Maybe it was just a coincidence that made me think of Jack. Maybe my brain was making connections that weren't really there because I still felt guilty about his death. But it doesn't change what I heard. and what I felt. The new owners never mentioned experiencing anything unusual in the house, at least not to me. I moved away eventually for work, but my parents still live next door. They've never reported anything strange either. I'm not saying it was definitely Jack trying to communicate from beyond the grave or anything like that. I've never been particularly spiritual or believed in ghosts, but sometimes I think about how Jack died alone, in the rain, trying to reach people who couldn't hear him calling for help. And I wonder if maybe, just maybe, he found another way to reach out, to let someone know he was still there, still tapping out his little tunes. Or maybe it was just an old table making noise as the wood contracted in the evening cool. I don't know, I really don't. But every October, especially during storms, I find myself thinking about Jack and that tapping sound. And I can't help but wonder if he's finally at peace, or if he's still trying to get someone's attention from the other side of the wall. The strangest part is that I don't feel afraid when I think about it anymore. Instead, there's this weird comfort in the idea that maybe Jack found a way to say goodbye properly. Maybe that's just me trying to make sense of something I can't explain. All I know for certain is what I heard that night. 15 seconds of deliberate musical tapping on an empty table, and the fact that I'll carry that memory with me for the rest of my life. Story 7 looks for reasonable explanations before jumping to conclusions, but what happened at my dad's cabin last month has completely shattered my worldview. I still don't have an explanation for it, and I'm not sure I want one. I should start by telling you about Malcolm. He's my older cat, about 10 years old now, a big grey tabby with these piercing yellow eyes. I've had him since he was a kitten, and he's always been different, not just quirky like most cats, but genuinely strange in ways that are hard to put into words. 3 months ago, I adopted a second cat, a little orange kitten I named Pippin. Most older cats are territorial when you bring in a new one, but Malcolm's reaction was something else entirely. He didn't hiss or swat at Pippin. Instead, he just watched, constantly, with this unsettling intensity that made me uncomfortable. He would sit perfectly still for hours, just staring at the kitten from across the room. Sometimes I'd wake up in the middle of the night to find Malcolm perched on my dresser, his eyes fixed on Pippin sleeping at the foot of my bed. Malcolm has always had this weird ability to seemingly vanish into thin air. I know that sounds ridiculous. He's a fairly large cat, not exactly stealthy, but I can't count how many times I've looked directly at him lying on the couch, turned my head for a second, and when I looked back, he was completely gone. No sound, no movement, just gone. I'd searched the entire apartment only to find him in some impossible spot, like the top shelf of a closed closet. Then there's the bell on his collar. I put it there years ago because he was constantly sneaking up on me, and I wanted some warning. But somehow Malcolm figured out how to move without making it ring. I've watched him jump from the floor to the counter without a single jingle. It's like he can silence it at will. Normal cats can't do that, right? About 6 weeks ago, my dad passed away unexpectedly. We weren't particularly close. He was a solitary guy who moved to a remote cabin after my mom died years ago, but his death hit me harder than I expected. Along with the grief came the surprise that he'd left me his property, 15 acres of dense woods with a small cabin nestled in the middle, about 3 hours outside the city. I decided to take some time off work to sort through his belongings and figure out what to do with the place. I brought both cats with me, thinking the change of scenery might be good for all of us. The first couple of days were peaceful. The cabin was rustic but comfortable, with a generator for electricity and a well for water. Cell service was non-existent, but that was kind of the point, to disconnect. The property was beautiful, with tall pines and oaks surrounding the small clearing where the cabin stood. During the day, I sorted through my dad's things, and in the evenings, I sat on the porch watching the sunset through the trees. Pippin loved it immediately, chasing bugs and climbing trees. Malcolm, on the other hand, something changed in him as soon as we arrived. He became hyper-vigilant, constantly on alert. He would disappear into the undergrowth for hours, then suddenly reappear at my feet, twitchy and tense. He started spending long periods staring out the windows, his tail flicking rapidly, ears swiveling to catch every sound. On our 4th night there, I woke up around 3 in the morning to find Malcolm sitting on the windowsill, completely rigid, staring out into the darkness. I got up to check what had caught his attention, but couldn't see anything in the moonlit clearing. Just as I was about to go back to bed, I heard it, a soft rustling in the undergrowth at the edge of the woods. Probably just a deer or raccoon, I thought. But Malcolm's reaction was extreme. His fur stood on end, and he made this low, guttural sound I'd never heard from him before. The next morning, I noticed something odd. The previous evening, I'd left my jacket draped over a chair on the porch. Now it was gone. I figured it must have blown away in the night breeze and spent 20 minutes searching the yard, but never found it. Strange, but not alarming. That night I was jolted awake by the sound of heavy footsteps in the brush outside. Not the light steps of a deer. These were deliberate, slow, and heavy. I froze in bed, heart pounding as the steps circled the cabin. Malcolm was at the window again, utterly still except for the slight tremor in his tail. The footsteps eventually faded, but neither Malcolm nor I slept for the rest of the night. Over the next few days, the incidents escalated. I'd find things moved from where I'd left them. Nothing valuable, just odd items like a coffee mug placed in the center of the porch, or my boots neatly lined up pointing toward the woods when I knew I'd kicked them off haphazardly by the door. Once, I found all the kitchen cabinet doors standing open when I woke up, though I was certain I'd closed them before bed. Malcolm's behavior became increasingly bizarre. He stopped eating regularly and spent almost all his time either staring out the windows or disappearing into the woods. Pippin, meanwhile, started hiding under the bed and wouldn't come out for hours. At night, I'd hear that rustling again, sometimes accompanied by what sounded like whispers, too faint to make out words, but distinctly human-like. On the 6th day, around mid-afternoon, I was sitting on the porch reading when Malcolm suddenly appeared from under the cabin steps. He meowed loudly, unusual for him, and walked a few feet toward the tree line, then stopped and looked back at me. He did this 3 times, clearly wanting me to follow him. Against my better judgment, I did. Malcolm led me into the woods, staying just ahead of me on a barely visible path. The forest was unusually quiet, no birdsong, no squirrels chattering, just the sound of my footsteps on the fallen leaves and the occasional snap of a twig. After about 10 minutes of walking, Malcolm disappeared around a bend in the path. When I reached the spot where he'd vanished, I stopped cold. There was no sign of him, but I had the overwhelming sensation of being watched from all directions. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I called Malcolm's name, my voice sounding thin and weak in the heavy silence. That's when I started hearing it, soft sounds coming from different directions around me. Not footsteps exactly, more like something brushing against leaves and branches, circling me slowly. I turned in place, trying to track the sound, but it seemed to shift position whenever I moved. My eyes fell on something bright on the ground about 20 feet ahead. It was my jacket, the one that had disappeared from the porch days earlier. It was laid out perfectly flat on the ground, as if someone had carefully placed it there. I took a step toward it, then froze as the circling sounds grew closer. Out of the corner of my eye, I spotted Malcolm crouched under a fallen log nearby. His eyes were wide, pupils fully dilated, and he wasn't looking at me. He was staring past me, totally focused on something I couldn't see. His whole body was in full alert mode, tail puffed to twice its normal size. I don't know what made me run. There was no specific trigger, no sound or sight that sent me into panic. It was more like a sudden, primal certainty that I was in immediate danger. I turned and sprinted back the way I'd come, branches scratching my face and arms as I crashed through the undergrowth. I don't remember much about getting back to the cabin. I just know that at some point, I was sitting on the floor inside, doors locked, gasping for breath. Malcolm had somehow beaten me back and was sitting at the window again, staring out at the woods. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the living room with all the lights on, jumping at every creak and rustle. Malcolm maintained his vigil at the window, completely motionless except for his eyes, which tracked something moving out there in the darkness. At dawn, I gathered enough courage to look outside. There, on a tree stump at the edge of the clearing, was my jacket, perfectly folded, with the sleeves tucked in just the way I always fold my clothes. It hadn't been there the previous evening. I know because I'd checked and double-checked the locks while staring out that very window. That was enough for me. I packed our things in record time, loaded the cats into their carriers, and was on the road before the morning mist had lifted from the trees. I haven't been back since. It's been almost 4 weeks now, and we're back in my apartment in the city. I've tried to convince myself that grief was making me paranoid, that I imagined the whole thing or exaggerated ordinary events, but I know what I experienced. Malcolm still watches and disappears at will. Sometimes he sits on my bookshelf for hours, staring at nothing I can see. Pippin seems to have recovered from whatever frightened him at the cabin, but he stays close to me now, rarely venturing into rooms alone. The strangest part? Sometimes at night, when Malcolm is asleep right next to me on the bed, I hear the soft jingle of a bell from somewhere else in the apartment. It's exactly the sound his collar makes when he moves, but it can't be him because he's right there, his chest rising and falling with each breath. I don't know what was out there in those woods. I don't know if it followed us home. All I know is that Malcolm was watching it, and now I find myself watching Malcolm, wondering what he sees that I can't. And sometimes, when he stares intently at an empty corner of the room, I find myself wondering if it's watching me too. Story 8. I still can't sleep properly during December. It's been 23 years, but every time I hear Christmas music or see those twinkling lights, my stomach knots up. Most people wouldn't understand why something so innocent makes me feel so sick. I've never shared this story publicly, but maybe writing it down will help. When I was 5, my family had this tradition of camping over the Christmas period with 3 other families we were close with. We called ourselves the Bush Christmas Crew. We'd drive about 4 hours from Perth to this secluded camping spot in the Australian bush. It was beautiful. Tall eucalyptus trees, a creek nearby, and far enough from civilization that you could see every star at night. It wasn't your typical Christmas celebration, but we loved it. We'd string up solar fairy lights between the trees, wrap tinsel around sticks to make Christmas trees, and wear those paper crowns from Christmas crackers for days. The adults would cook a massive feast on the portable BBQs, and we kids would swim in the creek during the day and chase fireflies at night. Pure magic when you're a kid. This particular year was 23 years ago, December of 2000. There were 9 of us kids in total, ranging from my age, 5, to about 12. My best friend was Jake, who was 6, and his sister Emma was 8. The oldest was Toby at 12, who we all looked up to. On our 3rd day at the camp, December 23rd, the adults were busy preparing food for Christmas Eve. They'd brought a few bottles of wine and were getting pretty relaxed around the main campfire. Us kids were bored and wanted to explore. Toby convinced his dad to let us go check out this massive fallen tree we'd spotted about 200 meters from camp. It wasn't far, and we'd been there before. Toby's dad gave him a walkie-talkie, one of those cheap yellow plastic ones that were popular back then. The adults had the other one. The rule was simple: stay together, don't go past the fallen tree, and respond when they checked in every 15 minutes. We were warned that the reception would get spotty if we went too far, so off we went, all 9 of us kids, feeling like we were on some grand adventure. The fallen tree was massive, probably knocked over in a storm years before. It had created this natural playground with its huge trunk and exposed root system. We were climbing all over it, playing hide and seek around the roots. The walkie-talkie crackled a few times with Toby's dad checking in. "You kids still at the tree? Over." Toby would respond professionally like he'd seen in movies. "Roger that, still at the tree, over and out." We'd been playing for maybe an hour. I remember the sun was starting to get lower, casting these long shadows through the trees. It was hot, and I was getting tired. I sat down on the trunk while the others were playing tag around the roots. Toby had put the walkie-talkie down on the tree trunk near me. Suddenly, it crackled to life. I remember staring at it, expecting to hear Toby's dad again, but the voice that came through wasn't his. It wasn't any voice I recognized. "Hello there, children. Over." The voice was male, soft-spoken, but somehow wrong in a way my 5-year-old brain couldn't articulate. I called out to Toby, who came running over. He picked up the walkie-talkie and pressed the button. "Who is this?" "Over." Toby tried to sound grown up, but I could hear the uncertainty in his voice. The walkie-talkie crackled again. "I'm Santa. I'm trying to find you to give you your presents. Can you help me find you?" "Over." My heart nearly exploded with excitement. "Santa, on the walkie-talkie." The other kids crowded around when they heard Toby's shout. "It's Santa!" Emma squealed, jumping up and down. Looking back, I'm amazed none of us questioned why Santa would need directions or why he sounded nothing like the jolly Santa from movies. We were just kids, filled with Christmas excitement and the naive trust that adults work so hard to instill in children. Toby, being the oldest, took charge. "We should tell the grown-ups. They'll want to know Santa is here." Thank God for Toby. Thank God he didn't try to lead us toward Santa or give our location away. It was pure luck. He just wanted to share the exciting news with the adults. We all ran back to camp, bursting with excitement, the walkie-talkie clutched in Toby's hand. We were shouting before we even reached the clearing. "Santa called us! Santa's on the walkie-talkie!" I'll never forget the adults' reactions. It wasn't joy or amusement or even confusion. It was pure, undiluted fear. My dad jumped up so fast he knocked over his camping chair. Jake's mom went completely white. Toby's dad snatched the walkie-talkie from his hand so roughly that Toby started crying. "What did he say? Exactly what did he say?" Toby's dad demanded, his voice shaking. Through tears, Toby repeated the message about Santa looking for us and needing directions. "Did you tell him where you were?" Jake's dad asked, his voice tight. We all shook our heads, confused by the adults' reactions. Why weren't they excited about Santa? Toby's dad pressed the button on the walkie-talkie. "Who is this? Identify yourself." His voice was deadly serious. No response. He tried again, louder this time. "This is private property. We have firearms. Identify yourself immediately." We didn't have firearms. We were just regular suburban families, but the threat hung in the air, still nothing but static. The mood in the camp changed instantly. The mothers gathered us kids together near the main tent, while the fathers grabbed flashlights and whatever could pass as a weapon: a hatchet for chopping wood, a heavy wrench from the toolkit, a large stick. 3 of them headed out to check the perimeter of our camp, while one stayed behind with the women and children. We kids were confused and scared, not understanding what was happening. Emma started crying, asking why everyone was mad about Santa. Her mother just held her tighter and said it wasn't really Santa. I remember sitting on my mom's lap, watching the darkness beyond our campfire, suddenly aware of how deep and black it was out there, how many places someone could hide. The fathers returned about 20 minutes later, looking grim. They hadn't found anyone, but that didn't seem to reassure them. A hurried conference followed, with the adults speaking in hushed, urgent tones. We caught snippets. Police, no cell service, pack up early, take shifts watching. That night, none of the kids were allowed to sleep in the smaller tents away from the main camp area. All the children were crammed into the largest tent with 2 of the mothers, while the fathers and remaining mother took turns staying awake, watching the darkness beyond our camp. I couldn't sleep. Every rustle of leaves, every crack of a twig made me flinch. I kept imagining someone out there in the dark, watching us, someone who had pretended to be Santa. The next morning, December 24th, Christmas Eve, the adults made an announcement. We were cutting the trip short. We'd be packing up and leaving that day instead of staying through Boxing Day as planned. This had never happened before. As we packed up, I noticed the adults constantly scanning the surroundings. They kept us kids in the center of the camp, never allowing anyone to wander off alone, not even to the nearby toilet area. The walkie-talkies were nowhere to be seen. They'd been stashed away in someone's car. The magic of Bush Christmas was gone, replaced by this suffocating tension. No one mentioned the Santa incident directly to us kids, but we knew it was the reason for the change in plans. It wasn't until years later, when I was about 15, that my parents finally explained what had happened that day. Someone outside our group had been monitoring our walkie-talkie frequency. They had learned that children were using it and had attempted to lure us away using the Santa story. The adults never reported the incident. We were in a remote location with no cell service, and by the time we got back to civilization, it seemed pointless. What could the police do days later in a vast wilderness area? But we never camped in that spot again, and walkie-talkies were banned from future trips. As an adult, I now understand how close we came to disaster. If we hadn't immediately run back to tell the adults, if we had instead tried to find Santa ourselves, I might not be here to write this. Pure luck saved us, the excited impulse of children wanting to share good news with their parents. I've researched missing persons cases from that area and time period since then. I haven't found anything conclusive, but there were 2 separate cases of hikers disappearing in that general region in early 2001. Both were adults traveling alone, and the cases remain unsolved. I don't know if there's a connection, but it haunts me to think about it. This Christmas, like every Christmas, I'll put on a happy face for my family. I'll decorate the tree and wrap presents. But part of me will be back in those woods, listening to a stranger's voice crackling through a cheap yellow walkie-talkie, promising presents if only we would help him find us. The worst part, I still don't know who it was or what might have happened if things had gone differently. Sometimes when I'm falling asleep, I imagine someone still out there in the bush, waiting with a walkie-talkie in hand, listening for the voices of children. Story 9. I've been debating whether to share this for years now. Maybe writing it all down will help me make sense of what happened, though I doubt it. I worked as the property manager at Aspen Shore Lodge on Lake Manitou from 2011 to 2014, and what I experienced there still haunts me. The lodge itself was beautiful, a 2-story cedar building nestled among pine trees with a perfect view of the lake. I took the job shortly after Elaine Barrett converted her father's home into a vacation rental. Harold Mercer, her dad, had built the place back in 1975 after retiring from Ford. When he passed in 2008, Elaine couldn't bear to sell it, but couldn't afford to keep it as a family retreat either. My first hint that something was off came about 6 months into the job. A family called the Townsends cut their week-long stay short after just 3 nights. When I arrived to check them out, Mrs. Townsend was frantically packing while her husband loaded their SUV. Their daughter, a quiet girl about 10 years old, sat on the porch steps clutching a stuffed rabbit. "We can't stay here another night," Mrs. Townsend told me, her voice shaking. "There's someone else in the house." I assured her that was impossible. I had the only spare key, and the security system hadn't been triggered. Mr. Townsend stepped in, lowering his voice. "Listen, we know how this sounds, but we all saw him, an elderly man in the library. I thought he was a trespasser and called out to him. He turned around, smiled, and then he wasn't there anymore. I might have dismissed it as an overactive imagination, but then their daughter spoke up. He asked if I signed the book yet," she said, eyes downcast. "He said everyone who stays has to sign." I refunded their money and chalked it up to an isolated incident. But 2 weeks later, another guest reported seeing an elderly man in the library who vanished when approached. By the end of summer 2010, 5 different groups had reported similar encounters. I started spending nights at the lodge between bookings, telling myself I was doing extra maintenance. Really, I was looking for trespassers or some logical explanation. During my 3rd overnight stay, I woke suddenly at 3:17 in the morning. The air felt thick, almost pressurized against my skin. The temperature had dropped so dramatically I could see my breath. Standing in the doorway was a woman in an old-fashioned dress, her hair styled in a way I'd only seen in photos from the 1920s or 30s. Her skin had a grayish tint, and water seemed to drip from her clothes onto the floor, though it left no puddles. "You need to sign the register," she said, her voice sounding distant despite being only feet away. "Everyone must sign. It's tradition." I blinked and she was gone. The wet footprints leading to my door remained for several seconds before fading away. The next morning I called Elaine and asked if she knew anything about a register or guest book. She mentioned her father kept meticulous records of visitors, but nothing formal. I searched the library where guests reported seeing the elderly man. The room held floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a large mahogany desk, and several leather armchairs. Nothing unusual. In June 2011, we hosted Dr. Marion Reeves, a psychology professor from the University of Michigan. She'd come to work on a book and wanted a quiet retreat. 3 days into her stay, she called me at 6 in the morning, her voice clinical but strained. "I need to show you something," she said. When I arrived, she handed me a journal. I woke at exactly 3:17. A woman in period clothing stood at the foot of my bed. She said, and I quote, "The register shows you haven't signed yet." When I sat up, she disappeared. Dr. Reeves had written the account immediately after, even noting the room temperature had dropped 20 degrees during the encounter. She'd also sketched the woman, the same one I'd seen months earlier. That day, we conducted a thorough search of the library. Dr. Reeves noticed one floorboard that sounded different when tapped. We pried it up and found a small space beneath. Inside was a leather-bound book, its cover worn and water-stained. On the front, in faded gold lettering, Manitou Lodge Register, established 1908. The first entries dated back to 1988 when the original Manitou Lodge stood on this property. The pages were filled with names, dates, and occasional comments about their stay. Then came an entry that made my blood run cold. July 17th, 1932. 11 names, all signed in different handwriting, followed by a note, "Wedding party of the Caldwell-Hayes celebration." Dr. Reeves and I researched local history that afternoon. We discovered that on that date, 11 people from a wedding party had taken a late-night boat ride on Lake Manitou. A sudden storm capsized the boat and all 11 drowned. Their bodies were recovered over the following week. But what truly terrified us was what came after those entries. Scattered throughout the remaining pages were more signatures. Guests who had stayed at Aspen Shore Lodge since its conversion to a rental. Names of people who couldn't possibly have known about this hidden register. My own name was there, though I had never signed it. I installed security cameras throughout the lodge the next day. For weeks, nothing unusual appeared on the footage. Then, one night in August, the camera in the library captured something. At 3:17 a.m., the desk drawer opened by itself. The register floated out and landed on the desk, its pages flipping until they stopped. A pen rose from the desk and moved across the page, though no hand held it. When I checked the register the next morning, a new name had been added. Karen Schultz, our current guest. I called her room, but there was no answer. I found her sitting on the dock, staring at the lake with vacant eyes. "I had the most vivid dream," she said without turning. "I was drowning. The water filled my lungs, but I couldn't die. Others were with me, pulling me deeper. They said I belonged to the lake now because I'd signed my name. I convinced Elaine to hire a historical researcher, Dr. Edward Fleming. He uncovered disturbing details about William Blackwood, the original owner of Manitou Lodge. Blackwood had been facing financial ruin in 1932 before receiving a substantial insurance settlement following the drowning incident. Former employees reported that Blackwood had been obsessive about having guests sign his special register, telling them that adding their name meant becoming part of Lake Manitou forever. In September 2011, I contacted Deputy Lauren Chen. She was skeptical until I showed her the footage and register. She arranged for water testing around the property. The results showed traces of an unknown compound with psychoactive properties. More disturbing, this same compound was present in the register's binding and ink. "It's like nothing we've seen before," the lab technician told us. "The molecular structure suggests it's incredibly old, possibly predating European settlement of this region." That winter, with the lodge closed for the season, I had recurring nightmares of drowning while a circle of pale figures watched from below. In each dream, William Blackwood stood on the shore, holding the register open as water filled my lungs. By summer 2012, word had spread about the haunted lodge on Lake Manitou. Some guests came specifically hoping for an encounter. Those who examined the register often reported the drowning dreams. 3 guests were hospitalized after sleepwalking toward the lake in the middle of the night. We tried removing the register from the property, but each time it reappeared in the library by morning. We installed locks on all exterior doors leading to the lake and hired night security. Still, guests reported seeing figures dripping lake water in hallways and bedrooms, always asking about signing the register. In 2013, underwater surveys revealed something none of us expected. A perfectly circular depression at the lake's deepest point, directly offshore from the lodge. Native American experts from the Odawa tribe identified it as resembling what their oral histories described as a doorway to the underworld. That spring, I woke one night to find my bedroom filled with standing water, though nothing was wet. 11 figures surrounded my bed, their clothes and hair moving as if underwater. The woman I'd seen before spoke. "You've kept others from signing, now you must take their place." I blinked, and they were gone, but the register lay open on my chest, a pen in my hand. My name was freshly signed, the ink still wet. The next morning I submitted my resignation to Elaine. She didn't fight it. She'd been wanting to sell the property anyway. No one would buy it, though. In 2014, she decided to demolish the lodge and donate the land to a conservation trust. During demolition, workers discovered human remains beneath the foundation. They were identified as William Blackwood, though historical records showed he supposedly died in Chicago in 1951. His body had been preserved through unknown chemical processes, positioned facing the lake. In his hands were pages torn from the register, the pages containing the names of the drowning victims. The register itself is now stored at the University of Michigan under strict protocols preventing direct contact. Researchers continue to study its properties, though several have taken unexpected leave after reporting drowning dreams. As for me, I moved 200 miles away from any large body of water. Yet every night at 3:17, I wake to the sound of dripping water. My room remains dry, but sometimes, just as I drift back to sleep, I hear whispers that I belong to Lake Manitou now. I've never gone back, but I know someday I'll have to. The lake is calling me. I signed the register, after all. Story 10. I've lived in places with strange vibes before, but nothing comes close to what happened in that house in Leeds. I still get goosebumps thinking about it. This all happened when I was 8, almost 9. My parents decided we needed a fresh start, so we moved to this small village outside Leeds in West Yorkshire. It used to be a mining community back in the day, but most of that was gone by the time we arrived. The house seemed normal enough when we first looked at it, nothing fancy, just a modest terraced house on a quiet street. The estate agent never mentioned anything weird about it, and my parents were just happy to find something in our price range. It was one in a row of similar houses that apparently used to belong to mine managers or something like that, built around 1900, give or take a few years. The problems started almost immediately after we moved in. My dad kept hanging family photos in the hallway, and every morning we'd find them on the floor. At first he blamed the nails, then the hooks, then the wall itself. He tried everything. Different hooks, stronger wire, even those sticky command strips. Nothing worked. After about the 10th time picking up shattered glass, he gave up and just put all our photos on shelves instead. Then there was the heating issue. No matter how high my dad cranked the thermostat, the house never felt properly warm. We're talking about multiple space heaters running at the same time, and you could still see your breath in some rooms. My mum started layering up inside the house like she was going on an Arctic expedition. My dad had an electrician and a plumber come look at everything. They both said the systems were working perfectly. One of them joked that the house just liked being cold. Not so funny when you're shivering under 3 blankets every night. But these were just the weird quirks that we tried to rationalize. The real stuff, the stuff that still makes me question what I saw, happened about 3 months after we moved in. The first incident was on a Saturday afternoon. My parents were downstairs watching telly, and I wanted to watch a video in their bedroom since they had the only other TV in the house. I grabbed my favorite tape and headed upstairs. As I reached the middle of the staircase, I froze. At the top of the stairs, hanging in midair, were 3 dresses, not on hangers, not on a clothesline, just floating there as if someone invisible was wearing them. They were swaying slightly, like they were dancing to music I couldn't hear. I remember gripping the banister so hard my knuckles went white. I couldn't move, couldn't scream, couldn't do anything but stare. The dresses were old-fashioned, the kind with high collars and long skirts. After what felt like forever but was probably just seconds, I forced myself to keep climbing the stairs. I needed to know if what I was seeing was real. As I got closer, the temperature dropped dramatically. It was like walking into a freezer. When I reached the top step, the dresses suddenly collapsed to the floor in a heap. No sound, no movement. They just fell, as if whatever was holding them up had vanished. I ran into my parents' room and slammed the door, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I didn't tell my parents what happened. I was afraid they wouldn't believe me, or worse, that they'd think something was wrong with me. I just sat on their bed, trembling, until I calmed down enough to put the video on. When I eventually left the room, the dresses were gone. I convinced myself I'd imagined it. Maybe it was a trick of the light. Maybe I was overtired. Kids have active imaginations, right? That's what I kept telling myself. But then came the second incident, and there was no explaining that one away. About 2 weeks later, I caught a nasty flu, high fever, chills, the works. My mum had tucked me into bed with some medicine and a glass of water. I was drifting in and out of sleep, feeling absolutely miserable, when I noticed someone standing in my doorway. At first, I assumed it was my mum checking on me. I was facing the wall, so I just mumbled something about feeling okay and closed my eyes again. But then I heard footsteps coming into the room, slow, deliberate steps that didn't sound like my mum's. The floorboards creaked in places they never did when my family walked on them. I rolled over to see who it was, and that's when I saw her. A woman was standing at the foot of my bed, but not a normal woman. She was transparent, like looking through blue-tinted glass. I could see the outline of my wardrobe through her body. She was wearing clothes from another time, a long dress with buttons up the front, her hair pinned up neatly under what looked like a small hat. She had round glasses perched on her nose, and behind them, eyes that looked concerned. The room was freezing cold, colder than it had ever been. My breath came out in visible puffs. I was too terrified to scream. I just lay there, paralyzed, as this blue lady stared down at me. Then she did something that still haunts me. She smiled, not a threatening smile, but a gentle one, like she was checking if I was all right. She reached out as if to touch my forehead, but her hand stopped just short. I felt a cold spot where her hand hovered, but no physical contact. After a moment, she turned and walked toward my bedroom door. But instead of going through it, she stopped at my wardrobe. And then, I swear on everything I hold dear, she seemed to grab the entire wardrobe and throw it through the wall. 1 second my wardrobe was there. The next it appeared to pass straight through the solid wall that connected our house to our neighbors. I screamed then. I screamed so loud my throat hurt. My parents came running upstairs, but by the time they burst into my room, the blue lady was gone. And my wardrobe? It was exactly where it had always been, unmoved. My parents chalked it up to fever dreams. "You're ill, love," my mum said. "The medicine can give you vivid nightmares." But I knew what I'd seen. The cold in the room was real. Even my dad commented on it. "Bloody heating's gone again," he muttered, pulling my blanket up higher. I couldn't sleep in that room for days afterward. I kept seeing her every time I closed my eyes. Eventually, I started sleeping on the floor of my parents' room until my dad put his foot down and made me go back to my own bed. About a month later, I was playing out front with some kids from down the street. Somehow we got talking about our houses, and I worked up the courage to ask if they'd ever seen anything strange on our street. The oldest boy, Tommy, who lived 3 doors down, looked at me funny. "You mean the blue lady?" he asked. My blood ran cold. I hadn't told anyone about what I'd seen. "Yeah," another kid chimed in. "She checks on you when you're sick. My brother saw her last year when he had chicken pox." I learned that day that the Blue Lady was something of a local legend. Children up and down our street had reported seeing her for years, always the same description. Blue-tinted, transparent, dressed in old-fashioned clothes with round glasses, always appearing to sick children. Always walking through walls between the connected houses. One elderly neighbor told us that when she was a girl, her mother used to tell her that the Blue Lady was a guardian who watched over the miners' children. No one knew exactly who she had been in life, but the description matched the time period when our houses were first built. I never saw the Blue Lady again after that night, though the house never did warm up properly, and we continued to find pictures on the floor, no matter how securely they were hung. We moved away when I was 11, and I've never been back to that village. To this day, I don't know who the Blue Lady was or why she appeared to me. Was she checking on me because I was ill? Was she trying to show me something about the house? I've researched the history of those terrace houses, trying to find any record of a woman who might match her description, but I've never found anything conclusive. Sometimes I wonder if she's still there, wandering between those connected houses, checking on sick children in the night. I wonder if the current residents have seen her, or if they've given up trying to hang pictures on their walls. I wonder if they feel the inexplicable cold spots, or hear the creaking of floorboards when no one's there. What I do know is that what I experienced wasn't a dream or a child's imagination running wild. It was real. The Blue Lady was real. And somewhere in that small Yorkshire village, in a row of former mine managers' cottages, she might still be watching, still walking through walls, still checking on the children who live there now. Story 11. I've been debating whether to share this for years. I guess I'm finally ready, though I still wake up in cold sweats some nights thinking about it. There's nowhere else I can talk about this. My therapist thinks I'm having delusions, and my remaining family pretends nothing happened. Maybe writing it down will help. My name's Catherine Armstrong. In 2013, my husband Jonathan inherited his family's lake house on Echo Lake in northeastern Pennsylvania. It's this gorgeous glacial lake, really deep, about 90 feet in places, and it got its name because sounds near the shore would come back with this weird clarity, sometimes repeating several times. It was beautiful, but always a bit eerie. Jonathan was a neurologist with a busy practice in Philadelphia. We rarely took vacations, so when he suggested we spend 2 weeks at the lake house that August, I was thrilled. Our kids, Elliot, 14, and Meredith, 11, needed a break from their devices anyway. The house itself was stunning, this sprawling 4,200 square foot contemporary with floor-to-ceiling windows facing the lake. Jonathan's father, Richard, had installed a top-notch security system before he passed, with cameras covering every angle of the property. It seemed excessive at the time, but I'm grateful now. Without that footage, no one would believe me. The first few days were perfect. The kids were swimming, Jonathan was relaxing for once, and I remember thinking how peaceful it was. The lake was so still most days, it looked like glass. Then came that night. I'll never forget the date, August 13th, 2013. We'd had a barbecue, watched the sunset over the lake, and gone to bed around 11. I woke up at exactly 2:17 in the morning. I remember checking my phone, annoyed because I thought Jonathan had left guests on our deck. I could hear multiple people talking outside. A woman's voice, then what sounded like a child. Their conversation was muffled but clear enough that I could tell they were right outside our bedroom window. Jonathan was already sitting up in bed. "Who the hell is out there?" he whispered. "I thought they were your friends," I said, suddenly realizing how strange it was to have visitors in the middle of the night. Jonathan grabbed his phone and pulled up the security camera feed. The deck was completely empty, but we could still hear the voices. Right there on the feed too, a woman saying something like, "It's not the same anymore. The light is different." Then a child's voice replying something I couldn't make out. We were frozen, just staring at each other. The voices continued for about 5 minutes, then stopped mid-sentence. Jonathan immediately checked the entire house and property. Nothing. No footprints on the dewy grass, no boats on the lake, nothing disturbed. The next morning, we convinced ourselves it must have been people on a neighboring property, though the nearest house was half a mile away. But deep down, I knew those voices had been right outside our window. We didn't tell the kids. What was there to say? We finished our vacation without further incidents, though I noticed Jonathan spending hours reviewing the security footage, especially at night. When we got home, he sent the audio to a colleague who specialized in speech pathology. Her analysis haunted me. The speech patterns show inconsistencies consistent with extreme trauma or dissociation. The child's voice particularly concerns me. It contains phonological elements that don't match any known dialect I'm familiar with. We tried to forget about it. Almost a year passed, and Jonathan suggested we return for another vacation in July 2014. I was hesitant, but didn't want to disappoint the kids. This time, things escalated. 3 days into our stay, we were having dinner on the deck when we heard our own conversation from lunch played back to us. Not exactly the same, but fragments of what we'd said earlier. Jonathan went completely pale. The kids noticed too. "Is someone recording us?" Elliot asked. I tried to laugh it off, suggesting it was just the echo effect the lake was known for, but we all knew that wasn't it. That night, I caught Jonathan installing more security cameras. July 17th was when it happened, the night that changed everything. We were all asleep when we heard Meredith screaming for help from the lake. Her voice was unmistakable, crying, "Mommy, Daddy, help me, I'm drowning." I've never moved so fast in my life. We all ran to the lake, flashlights scanning the water, yelling for her. Then Jonathan grabbed my arm and pointed back at the house. Meredith was standing on the porch in her pajamas, confused and half asleep, asking what was happening. If she was there, whose voice had we heard? Jonathan reviewed the security footage immediately. What we saw still makes my skin crawl. There was a figure standing on our dock, a woman in what looked like old-fashioned clothes, maybe from the 1940s. But the way she moved wasn't right. Her movements were fluid, almost like she was still underwater despite standing in the open air, and the voice coming from her was Meredith's, perfect mimicry, calling for help. We left the next morning. Jonathan promised we wouldn't return, but I could tell he was obsessed with understanding what was happening. He spent months researching Echo Lake's history, discovering old newspaper articles about drownings going back to the 1800s and Native American legends warning about the lake. For almost 2 years, we stayed away. Then in May 2016, Jonathan said he needed to close up the property permanently. He insisted on going alone, said he just needed to shut everything down and prepare it for sale. I should have gone with him. I should have known something was wrong by how intensely he'd been researching the lake. His last call to me still plays in my head. It was around midnight. He sounded different, not scared exactly, but awestruck. "Kath, there are lights under the water. They're moving like they're following patterns, and I can hear voices coming from underwater. They're calling me by name." I begged him to leave immediately. He promised he would, said he was just going to take one more look from the dock, then drive home. That was the last time I spoke to my husband. When he didn't come home or answer his phone the next day, I called the local police. They found his car in the driveway, his phone on the dock, and wet footprints leading from the lake to the house. There was water pooled on the dock in a perfect circle, like something had risen straight up out of the lake and stood there. The search lasted weeks. Dive teams, cadaver dogs, helicopters, they found nothing. No body, no evidence of what happened. Jonathan had simply vanished. I was destroyed. The kids were devastated. For over a year we lived in limbo, not knowing if he was dead or alive. The police eventually closed the case as a presumed drowning, though they never found a body. In August 2017, I finally worked up the courage to return to the house with my brother to pack everything up and sell the property. We arrived in the late afternoon. I couldn't bring myself to stay the night, so we planned to work until evening, then come back the next day. I was in Jonathan's study boxing up his research when the security system pinged. Someone was at the back door. My brother was upstairs, so I checked the feed on my phone and nearly collapsed. It was Jonathan, standing at the glass door, soaking wet, his clothes the same ones he'd been wearing when he disappeared. But he looked wrong. His skin was too pale, almost translucent, and his eyes seemed larger somehow. He was staring directly at the camera, mouth moving, saying the same thing over and over. "It isn't what we thought. There's a whole city down there." I ran downstairs, screaming for my brother. By the time we got to the door, Jonathan was gone. But the security footage caught everything. The forensic team later confirmed the wet footprints matched Jonathan's exactly. I couldn't bring myself to sell the property after that. Instead, I contacted researchers who specialized in unusual phenomena. A team from a university spent 6 months studying the lake. Their findings were disturbing: structures at the bottom of the lake that weren't natural formations, unusually high oxygen content at depths where there shouldn't be any, and regular patterns of sound coming from the deepest point between 1 and 4 in the morning. One researcher, David Lanier, became particularly invested. In October 2019, he was doing an overnight observation when he reported seeing lights beneath the surface. The audio recording captured him suddenly responding to questions no one had asked, then calmly saying, "I understand now," before the splash of him diving into the water. They never found his body either. I've stayed away since then, but I keep the security cameras running, monitored remotely. 3 months ago, a wildlife camera captured 3 figures emerging from the lake at dawn. They matched the descriptions of Jonathan, our son Elliot, and me. This doppelganger family stood at the shore for 12 minutes before returning to the water with those same unnatural movements, like they were still partially underwater. The local indigenous people apparently had legends about Echo Lake being a place where the boundary between worlds becomes thin enough for passage in both directions. I've started to believe them. Last week, I received a package, no return address, but the handwriting was Jonathan's. Inside was a small, smooth stone that glows blue in the dark, and a note that read, "We're waiting for you, Kath. Meredith misses you. The water isn't what you think." Elliot disappeared 2 days ago. The police found his bike by the lake. I'm going back tomorrow. I don't know what's in Echo Lake, but I think it has my family now. If you don't hear from me again, stay away from that place. Or maybe come find us if you're brave enough. There's a whole city down there after all. Story 12. I still get goosebumps thinking about what happened back in 2015. I was 19 then, and my cousin Emma was 15. We weren't just cousins. We were best friends despite the age gap. I spent almost every weekend at her place in Highfield since my parents were going through a rough patch and being at home felt suffocating. Emma's house was this old 2-story place with a huge garden in the back. Her family had lived there for generations. My aunt inherited it from her parents. It had all these creaky floorboards and weird drafts, but I loved it there. It felt like a proper home, you know. The first incident happened in late July. I wasn't there when it happened, but Emma called me right after, and her voice was shaking so bad I could barely understand her. Once she calmed down, she told me everything. She'd been looking for her mom that afternoon. It was around 3 o'clock, and the house was unusually quiet. She checked the living room, the study, even the basement, but couldn't find her anywhere. As she was walking through the kitchen, she glanced out the window and spotted what she thought was her mom in the backyard. Emma said she was confused because her mom had mentioned she'd be organizing some stuff in the attic that day. Still, there was definitely someone out there, so she headed outside to see what was going on. When she stepped into the garden, she saw a woman with her back turned, hanging up laundry on the clothesline. The woman was wearing this flowing white dress that went down to her ankles. Emma called out, "Mom," but the woman didn't respond. Emma told me she stood there for maybe 30 seconds, watching this woman methodically hanging white sheets. The whole time she kept thinking it was weird because her mom had been wearing jeans and a faded red t-shirt earlier that day. Plus, her mom never wore dresses while doing housework. Then Emma got distracted by their cat brushing against her legs. She looked down for literally 2 seconds, and when she looked back up, the woman was gone. Not like she'd walked away, just vanished. The laundry was still there, half hung, swaying slightly in the breeze. Completely freaked out, Emma ran back inside and upstairs, where she found her mom in the attic, still wearing her jeans and red t-shirt, sorting through old photo albums. When Emma asked if she'd been outside hanging laundry, her mom looked at her like she was crazy and said she'd been in the attic for the past hour. Emma asked if her mom owned any white dresses. Her mom said no, just her wedding dress that was packed away in storage. There was no explanation for who that woman could have been. That's when Emma called me, absolutely terrified. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a neighbor who wandered into the wrong yard, or maybe the light was playing tricks on her. But Emma was adamant about what she saw, and I'd never heard her so shaken up before. I promised I'd come over that weekend to help her figure it out. I thought maybe we could ask around the neighborhood, see if anyone else had seen a strange woman. But by the time I got there, Emma seemed less freaked out. She said maybe she'd imagined it, or maybe it was just someone who'd gotten the wrong house. So we dropped it. We spent the weekend watching horror movies, probably not the best idea in retrospect, and baking cookies, and Emma didn't mention the woman again. Then, about 2 weeks later, on August 10th, it happened again. This time, I was actually at the house when Emma had her second encounter, though I didn't see anything myself. It was a bright, sunny afternoon. We were hanging out in Emma's room when their dog Rusty started barking like crazy downstairs. Emma's mom yelled up that Rusty had gotten out into the garden and asked if Emma could go get him before he dug up the flower beds again. Emma headed downstairs while I was in the bathroom. When I came out, she wasn't back yet, so I just sat on her bed scrolling through my phone. About 5 minutes later, Emma burst into the room. Her face was completely white and she was shaking all over. I jumped up immediately, asking what happened, if she was okay. She just stood there, staring at me with wide eyes. Finally, she managed to speak. "She's back," she whispered. "The woman in white." I sat her down on the bed and got her some water. Once she calmed down a bit, she told me what happened. She'd gone outside to catch Rusty, who was running around the garden like a maniac. As she was chasing him toward the back of the garden where they had some apple trees, she looked up and saw her. The same woman in the same white dress, this time picking apples and putting them in a basket. Just like before, Emma only saw her from behind. The woman had dark hair pulled back in some kind of bun, and her dress was pure white, almost glowing in the sunlight. Emma said she froze on the spot, too scared to move or say anything. The woman seemed completely focused on picking apples, as if she didn't notice Emma at all. Then Rusty ran past Emma, barking at something in the bushes, and Emma instinctively turned to look. When she looked back at the apple trees, the woman was gone. No footprints in the soft garden soil, no apples missing from the trees, no basket left behind, nothing to indicate anyone had been there at all. This time, I was there to witness how genuinely terrified Emma was. There was no way she was making this up. And the weirdest part was that I had been looking out her bedroom window just minutes before, with a clear view of the garden and those apple trees. I hadn't seen anyone. That night, after Emma's parents went to bed, we stayed up researching on my laptop. We Googled things like woman in white ghost, white lady apparition, and white dress ghost sightings. What we found made my blood run cold. There were stories from all over the world about the White Lady, a female ghost who appears dressed in white. In some cultures, she's a harbinger of death or disaster. One particular legend said that the White Lady appears by day or night in or near a house where a family member is fated to die soon. Emma and I looked at each other, both thinking the same thing, but too scared to say it out loud. Could this be a warning? Was someone in Emma's family going to die? We tried to convince ourselves it was just a coincidence. Maybe Emma was just seeing things, or maybe there really was some random woman trespassing in their garden. We didn't tell her parents about our research. We didn't want to scare them with ghost stories. Besides, what could they do? For the next few weeks, everything was normal. Emma didn't see the woman again, and we both started to think maybe it had been nothing after all. Maybe stress or an overactive imagination. Emma had been studying hard for exams after all. Then came September 25th. I was at home when I got the call from Emma. Her cousin Jack, my cousin too, but we weren't as close, had been in a motorcycle accident. He was in critical condition at the hospital. Jack was 22, Emma's mom's nephew. He lived about an hour away and would sometimes come visit on his motorcycle. I rushed over to Emma's house. The whole family was in shock. Jack had always been careful on his bike, always wore his helmet. The accident happened when a car pulled out in front of him without looking. He'd swerved to avoid it and crashed into a guardrail. We spent that night at the hospital. Jack was in surgery for hours. The doctors did everything they could, but he'd lost too much blood and had severe head trauma despite the helmet. He died in the early hours of September 26th. It wasn't until a few days after the funeral that Emma brought it up. We were sitting in her room, both still processing our grief, when she whispered, "Do you think it was her? The woman in white? Do you think she was warning us about Jack?" I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to dismiss it as a coincidence, but the timing was too perfect, too eerie. The white lady appears, and less than 2 months later, a family member dies tragically and unexpectedly. We went back to our research, digging deeper this time. We found stories of people who had seen a white lady before a death in the family. The descriptions matched what Emma had seen, a woman in a flowing white dress, often with her back turned, doing ordinary everyday tasks like hanging laundry or picking fruit, never showing her face. Some accounts said the white lady was a protective spirit, trying to warn families of impending tragedy. Others suggested she was death itself, marking those who were about to lose someone. Either way, the connection between her appearance and subsequent deaths was too consistent to ignore. 5 years have passed since then. Emma's never seen the woman in white again. We've talked about it many times, trying to make sense of what happened. Was it really a ghost, a premonition, some kind of psychological phenomenon? I still get chills when I visit Emma's house and look out at those apple trees. Sometimes I catch myself scanning the garden, half expecting to see a figure in white, but there's never anyone there. Jack's death left a huge hole in our family. He was so young, so full of life. I can't help but wonder, if we'd understood the warning sooner, could we have prevented it somehow? Could we have told Jack not to ride his motorcycle that day? Or maybe the white lady wasn't a warning at all, but simply a sign that some things are fated to happen beyond our control. Emma and I have only told a few close friends about what happened. Most people would think we're crazy or just trying to find meaning in a random tragedy. But we know what she saw, and we know the legend came true. I've started noticing white dresses more now. Every time I see a woman wearing white, I feel this instant surge of dread, this primitive fear response. I always make sure to look at their face, to make sure it's just a normal person going about their day. To this day, I still don't know who or what that woman was, but I know this. When a woman in white appears in your garden, pay attention. She might be trying to tell you something important, something terrible that's about to happen, something you can't stop, but maybe, just maybe, you can prepare for. The scariest part? I've started having dreams about her. In my dreams, she finally turns around, but I always wake up before I can see her face. Story 13. I've always had a weird relationship with death. Growing up as a funeral director's kid in Pinewood Valley meant I spent more time around dead bodies than most people do in their entire lives. Our family has owned Mason Funeral Home and Cemetery for 4 generations now. By the time I was 8, I knew how to properly arrange flowers around a casket. By 12, I could recite the steps of embalming, though my parents wouldn't let me watch until I was 16. Now at 32, I've seen and heard things that most people wouldn't believe. Let me start by saying I'm not some ghost hunter or paranormal enthusiast. I'm just a guy who happens to work in a place where the line between the living and the dead gets blurry sometimes. My mom never bought into any of it. Even after decades of preparing bodies, she remained stubbornly skeptical about anything supernatural. Dad was different though. He'd always give me this knowing look when something unexplainable happened, this little nod that said, "You saw that too, right?" The first time I realized our funeral home had permanent residents who weren't actually staff was when I was 6. It was a Tuesday afternoon in October, and I remember because the leaves had just started falling, and Dad had me help rake them from the cemetery paths that morning. My parents were preparing for a service, a small boy who died from leukemia. I wasn't supposed to be in the preparation room, but I snuck in while they were taking a break. There was this tiny blue casket with superhero stickers carefully placed around the edges. Something about it being so small made my chest hurt in a way I couldn't understand at that age. 3 days after the funeral, I was playing in the back room where we kept extra chairs and some of my toys. I'd set up my action figures on the desk, arranging them for an epic battle. I turned around to grab another figure from my backpack, and when I looked back, 3 of them had fallen over. I set them up again, and the same thing happened when I turned away. After the 4th time, I got frustrated and yelled, "Stop it!" into the empty room. Dad came in a few moments later. "Everything okay, buddy?" he asked, looking around the room carefully. "My toys keep falling," I complained. He nodded slowly, like he completely understood. "Maybe ask nicely next time," he said, and left the door open as he walked away. I didn't understand what he meant until about 5 minutes later, when I saw a boy standing in the doorway. He looked around my age, wearing jeans and a t-shirt with a long blue cape tied around his neck. I remember thinking it was weird that someone would wear a cape to a funeral home. "Hi," I said, but he didn't answer. He just stood there watching me. I tried again. "Do you want to play?" Still nothing. He didn't smile or frown or even blink. Then I heard Mom calling for me, and when I looked back at the doorway, he was gone. That night at dinner I asked, "Who was that boy with the cape?" Mom froze mid-bite, fork suspended in the air. "What boy, Charlie?" "The one with the blue cape. He was watching me play today." Mom's face went pale as she looked at Dad. "He couldn't have seen him," she whispered. "The casket was closed the entire time." Dad just nodded. "Charlie, can you tell us what else he looked like?" I described his light brown hair, the gap between his front teeth, and the superhero emblem on his cape. With each detail, Mom's face grew more concerned until she abruptly left the table. Later, I overheard them talking in hushed voices in the kitchen. That's when I learned that I had perfectly described the boy in the blue casket, right down to the superhero cape his parents had buried him in, without ever having seen him. They never told me not to talk to him. In fact, Dad seemed to accept it as completely normal. "Some people stick around for a bit," he explained the next day. "Usually they're just confused or have something left to do." Over the next few years, I got used to the boy's presence. We never really had conversations, but things would move around when he was there. Items would go missing, then reappear in strange places. Cabinet doors would open and close. Once, all the toilet paper in the bathroom unrolled itself while I was brushing my teeth. When I was 8, Dad told me the boy's name was also Charlie. That made things easier somehow. If I couldn't find something, I'd say out loud, "Charlie, where did my pencil go?" And often I'd find it sitting on my chair or desk when I turned around. It was like having a mischievous little brother who never grew up. By the time I was in high school, I figured Charlie had moved on because his pranks became less frequent. But occasionally, when I'd be studying late at night in the funeral home office, my papers would suddenly scatter across the floor, and I'd know he was still there, still watching. The summer after college, I started working full-time at the cemetery. That's when I met her, the woman in black. The first time I saw her, I was marking plots for a new section we were opening. It was just after sunset, that strange twilight hour, when shadows stretch and blur. I looked up from my clipboard and noticed a woman standing about 50 yards away by an old grave marker. She wore a long black dress with lace sleeves or gloves. It was hard to tell in the fading light. On her head was what looked like an old-fashioned cocktail hat with a veil that covered her face. She wasn't moving, just standing perfectly still, staring down at the grave. I figured she was a visitor, although it was odd to be there so late. I was about to call out to her to let her know we were closing soon, when one of our groundskeepers, Frank, shouted my name from behind me. "Charlie, you seen my measuring tape?" he called. I turned to answer him, and when I looked back, the woman was gone. No movement, no sound, just gone. "Frank," I said, "did you see that woman by the Winters plot?" He squinted in that direction. "What woman? Nobody's been here since that family left about 2 hours ago." I told myself it was the light playing tricks, or maybe my eyes were tired, but deep down, I knew what I'd seen, and I knew it wasn't the first time something like this had happened. 3 weeks later, I saw her again. This time it was mid-morning, bright and clear. I was trimming branches from the center oak tree when I caught a glimpse of black fabric moving between headstones. I followed at a distance, watching as she walked with slow, deliberate steps, always keeping her head slightly bowed. She circled behind the oak tree, and by the time I made it around, she had vanished. That afternoon I checked our burial records. The plot where I'd first seen her standing belonged to a man named Thomas Winters, who died in 1973. His mother, Eleanor Winters, was buried on the opposite side of the oak tree, having died in 1989. According to the notes in our files, Thomas had died young, leaving behind a mother who visited his grave every Sunday until her own death 16 years later. After that, I saw Eleanor every few months, always at dusk, always moving between her grave and her son's, separated by that massive oak tree. Unlike Charlie, she never acknowledged my presence or interacted with anything. She seemed caught in her own world, endlessly walking the path between two graves, perhaps waiting for a reunion that death had promised but not yet delivered. I never told Mom about Eleanor. By then, she'd made it clear she didn't want to hear about Dad's ghost stories, as she called them. But Dad and I would sometimes sit on the back porch after closing, sharing a beer and talking about the spirits that seemed to linger in our little corner of Pinewood Valley. "They're just people," Dad would say. "They've just forgotten how to leave." The strangest day of my life happened about 6 months ago. It started normally enough. I had a burial scheduled for 10 in the morning, a consultation with a family at 1, and paperwork to catch up on in between. Dad had been retired for 3 years by then, and Mom only came in for the larger services. It was just me and our 2 assistants running things most days. The morning service went smoothly. It was for an elderly woman who had planned everything herself, down to the last detail. Her adult children seemed relieved that all they had to do was show up. After everyone left, I was walking back to the office when I heard a child laughing. I followed the sound to the old section of the cemetery where the headstones date back to the early 1900s. That's when I saw Charlie, my Charlie, the boy with the cape, standing on top of a large marble monument, balanced perfectly on one foot. He was looking at something in the distance, pointing and laughing. In all the years I'd known of his presence, I'd never seen him this clearly in daylight, and I'd certainly never heard him laugh. It sent shivers down my spine, not because it was creepy, but because it sounded so alive. "Charlie," I called out. He turned to look at me, and for the first time ever, he smiled directly at me. Then he jumped down and ran between 2 large mausoleums. I ran after him, calling his name, but when I rounded the corner, I ran straight into Eleanor. She was solid. I actually bumped into her and had to step back. For a moment, the veil over her face lifted, and I saw ancient, hollow eyes in a face that seemed both young and impossibly old at the same time. She raised one lace-gloved hand and pointed behind me. When I turned around, I saw that every single spirit that had ever haunted our cemetery was now visible. There were dozens of them standing among the headstones, some from centuries ago based on their clothing, others more recent. Some looked confused, others peaceful. A few were staring right at me with a kind of desperate intensity that made my heart race. I stood frozen, unable to move or speak. The air felt heavy and charged, like right before a thunderstorm. Then, as if someone had flipped a switch, they all turned in unison to look at something in the sky that I couldn't see. One by one they began to fade, starting with the oldest spirits and moving forward in time. Eleanor was one of the last to go. She reached out as if to touch my face, her hand passing through me with a cold that went straight to my bones, and then she was gone. Charlie was the very last. He stood there in his blue cape, looking uncertain for the first time since I'd known him. He glanced up at whatever the others had seen, then back at me. He gave me a small wave and I found myself waving back. Then he too faded away, his cape fluttering in a wind I couldn't feel. I stood there alone among the headstones for I don't know how long. When I finally made it back to the office, my assistant told me I'd been gone for over 3 hours. The family for the 1 o'clock consultation had come and gone, frustrated by my absence. That night I called Dad and told him everything. He listened without interrupting, then said, "Sometimes there's a gathering. I've only seen it once, about 30 years ago. It means something's changing on their side." "Will they come back?" I asked. "Some might, others move on for good." It's been 6 months, and I haven't seen Charlie or Eleanor since that day. The funeral home feels emptier somehow, quieter. Sometimes I still find myself saying, "Charlie, have you seen my keys?" out of habit. But there's never an answer. I don't know what they saw that day, what called them all together or why they all left. Dad says not to worry, that it's part of the natural order of things, but I can't help feeling like I lost family members that day, not just ghosts. Death has always been normal to me. It's the family business after all. But now I find myself wondering what waits on the other side, what finally called my lifelong invisible companions away after all these years. And sometimes in the quietest moments just after sunset, I catch myself looking up at the sky, trying to see what they saw. Story 14. I still have nightmares about what happened that day. Even though it's been 11 years, I can still smell it. I can still see her face. I doubt I'll ever be able to forget. It was August 2013 and I had just gotten my learner's permit. I was 17 and feeling pretty good about myself. My parents both worked during the day, so I'd sometimes take the car out when they weren't around. Yeah, I know that was illegal without a licensed driver, but I was a dumb teenager who thought he was invincible. One particularly hot day, I decided I wanted to go to the beach. Living on Long Island, we had plenty of options, but most of the nice beaches required parking permits that I didn't have. So I ended up at Mastic Beach, which had a reputation for being, well, let's just say it wasn't exactly the Hamptons. I'd heard Mastic Beach was kind of dirty, but I figured it couldn't be that bad. Plus, I wouldn't have to worry about running into anyone who might tell my parents I was driving alone. The beach would probably be empty on a weekday anyway. I arrived around 1 in the afternoon. The parking lot was almost completely empty except for a couple of beat-up cars. As I got out of my car, I noticed there wasn't a lifeguard on duty. There was just a faded sign that read, "Swim at your own risk." I grabbed my beach towel, a folding chair, and a small cooler with some sandwiches and sodas. The moment I stepped onto the sand, I knew why people avoided this beach. There was trash everywhere, plastic bottles, food wrappers, cigarette butts. The sand itself was dark and coarse, nothing like the soft golden sand at the beaches where my family usually went. But I was already there, and I wasn't about to waste the gas I'd used to drive over, so I found a relatively clean spot and set up my chair and towel. I took off my shirt and applied some sunscreen, then decided to at least wade into the water to cool off. The water was murky, with a greenish-brown tint from all the algae. Small pieces of trash floated on the surface, and the waves deposited more garbage onto the shore with each crash. I walked in up to my knees, but that was as far as I was willing to go. The bottom felt slimy against my feet, and I couldn't see what I was stepping on. After about 5 minutes of standing there, I decided swimming wasn't happening. I trudged back to my spot, dried off my legs, and sat in my chair. I ate half of my sandwich while staring out at the water, feeling disappointed with my beach day. Since swimming was out, I figured I'd at least take a walk along the shoreline, maybe find a better spot or just get some exercise. I put my phone and wallet in my backpack and tucked it under my chair, figuring no one would bother with it on such an empty beach. I started walking east along the waterline, where the wet sand was firmer. The beach stretched for quite a while, curving slightly as it followed the coastline. There were fewer people the further I went. Actually, I didn't see anyone at all after the first few minutes. About 10 minutes into my walk, I noticed a smell. At first it was faint, and I thought it was just the typical beach smell: seaweed, salt, fish. But with each step, it got stronger and more putrid. I figured it was probably a dead fish, or maybe someone had left garbage to rot in the sun. I kept walking, focusing on the horizon rather than looking down at the trash-strewn sand. I was thinking about turning around soon when my foot hit something that wasn't sand or trash or driftwood. It was solid and hairy. I felt it roll slightly under my foot. I looked down. I'll never forget what I saw. Never. It's burned into my brain forever. It was a human head, a severed human head, partially buried in the wet sand where the waves had been washing over it. It was an older woman, maybe in her 60s. Her gray hair was matted with sand and seaweed, but the worst part, the absolute worst part, was her face. Her eyes were wide open, staring right up at me. Her mouth was open too, in this horrible silent scream. The skin was bloated and had a grayish-blue tint. Where her neck should have been was just ragged flesh and bone. I screamed. I'm not ashamed to admit it. I screamed like I've never screamed before or since. I jumped back, tripped, and fell on my ass in the sand. I couldn't stop staring at her face, those eyes that seemed to be looking right at me. Then I started gagging. The smell hit me full force now that I knew what it was. It wasn't just the normal decay smell. It was sweet and rotten at the same time, like nothing I'd ever smelled before. I scrambled to my feet and ran. I ran as fast as I could back the way I came. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might explode. My legs felt weak, and I kept stumbling in the sand. All I could think about was getting away from that thing, but the image wouldn't leave my mind. Every time I blinked, I saw her face, those open eyes, that gaping mouth. When I got back to my stuff, I doubled over and threw up. Everything I'd eaten came up in violent heaves. Even after my stomach was empty, I kept dry heaving. My whole body was shaking uncontrollably. I grabbed my phone with trembling hands and called 911. I could barely speak. The dispatcher kept asking me to calm down, to speak more clearly. How could I be calm? I'd just found a severed human head. Please, I remember begging. Please come quickly. Mastic Beach. There's a head, a woman's head. Oh God, please hurry. The dispatcher told me to stay where I was and that police were on their way. I sat in my chair, hugging my knees to my chest, rocking back and forth. I couldn't stop shaking. I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone watching me from the dunes. What if the person who did this was still around? What if they saw me find it? The police arrived about 15 minutes later, though it felt like hours. 2 officers approached me first while others went toward where I'd pointed. I must have looked like a mess, pale, sweaty, with vomit on my shirt. They asked me questions, my name, what I was doing there, exactly what I'd found and where. I told them everything, including that I wasn't supposed to be driving alone with just a learner's permit. At that point, I didn't care if I got in trouble. Nothing seemed important compared to what I'd seen. More police cars arrived, then an ambulance, then what I assume were detectives in plain clothes. They taped off the entire beach and told me I needed to go to the station to give a formal statement. I called my mom from the police station. She was furious at first that I'd taken the car, but when the police explained what had happened, her anger turned to horror and concern. She came to pick me up and I broke down crying when I saw her. I hadn't cried until then. I think I'd been in shock. The police were actually pretty decent about the whole driving without supervision thing. They gave me a warning, but no ticket. I guess they figured I'd been through enough. They told me they might need to talk to me again, but otherwise, I was free to go. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that woman's face. I kept washing my hands over and over, even though I hadn't actually touched the head. Just having my foot bump against it made me feel contaminated somehow. For the next few days, I barely left my room. I couldn't eat much. The smell seemed to have followed me home, though my parents said they couldn't smell anything. I showered 3 or 4 times a day, scrubbing my skin raw, especially my feet. About 3 weeks later, I saw it on the news. They'd identified the woman as Diane Ross, 63 years old. She had been reported missing by her daughter 2 days before I found her. The news didn't give many details, but they did say she had been murdered, stabbed in the back of the neck before being decapitated. They never caught who did it. At least, not in the months I kept obsessively checking for updates. Eventually, the story faded from the news, replaced by other tragedies, other horrors. My parents moved us to a wealthier, safer town on Long Island the following year. They never said it was because of what happened, but I think it was. I was having trouble sleeping, my grades had dropped, and I'd become withdrawn. They thought a fresh start would help. It did, a little, but I've never been back to any beach since then. I can't stand the smell of the ocean or seafood. I have panic attacks if I see seaweed or algae-filled water. I dropped out of college twice before finally finishing my degree, and I've been in and out of therapy for years. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd gone to a different beach that day, or if I'd just stayed home. Would someone else have found her? Would she have washed out to sea? Would her family have ever known what happened to her? I'm 28 now. I have a decent job, an apartment, a girlfriend who knows something traumatic happened to me but doesn't know the details. I've never told anyone the full story except my therapist. But sometimes when I'm falling asleep, I feel the bump against my foot again. I smell that smell. I see those eyes staring up at me. And I wonder if the person who did that to Diane Ross is still out there, walking around free. I wonder if they know that their handiwork destroyed not just one life, but irreparably damaged mine too. I don't think I'll ever find peace until they catch whoever did it, and maybe not even then. Story 15. I still have nightmares about that NPCC camp at Chongqing High School. It's been 3 months, but I can't shake what happened. I've never been a superstitious person, but after what I experienced, I'm not sure what to believe anymore. It was supposed to be a normal 3-day camp. Team building exercises, leadership training, the usual stuff. I was excited because Chongqing High has amazing facilities. The campus is beautiful, especially the central lake with its dancing fountains. During orientation, our instructor mentioned how the school was built in the 1930s, which made it one of the oldest in Singapore. I remember thinking how cool it was to be training at a place with so much history. The first day went smoothly. We did drills in the morning, had lunch in the canteen, then more activities until dinner. After lights out at 10, my bunkmate Ming and I couldn't sleep. The air conditioning in our room was broken, and it was ridiculously hot. We decided to sneak out for some fresh air. "We'll just walk around the lake," Ming whispered as we tiptoed past the teachers' quarters. "Nobody will know." The night was eerily quiet. Most of the campus lights were off, except for some dim pathway lighting. When we reached the lake, the fountains had been turned off for the night. Without the constant spray of water, the lake was completely still, like glass. I'd never seen it like this before. During the day, the fountains made the water cloudy and disturbed, but now it was crystal clear. Ming pointed to something in the water. "Wei, do you see that?" I looked where he was pointing and felt my stomach drop. In the center of the lake, clearly visible through the still water, was a large, dark hole. It was perfectly circular, maybe 3 meters across, and seemed to go down forever. It looked like someone had pulled a plug at the bottom of the lake. "What the hell is that?" I asked, my voice sounding too loud in the quiet night. Ming shrugged. "No idea. I've never seen the water this clear before." We moved closer to the edge of the lake for a better look. That's when I heard it. a faint sound coming from the direction of the hole. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but there was no breeze that night. I strained my ears. "Do you hear that?" I whispered. "Hear what?" Ming looked confused. "That groaning sound coming from the hole." Ming shook his head. "I don't hear anything, man." I stepped closer to the water's edge. The sound was clearer now, a low, pained groan, like someone in agony. Then I heard something else, laughter. Not happy laughter, but something cruel and cold that made the hair on my arms stand up. "There's definitely something down there," I insisted. "Listen." Ming looked genuinely concerned. "Wei, I don't hear anything. Are you messing with me?" I wasn't. The sounds were getting louder. Moans of pain and that terrible laughter. I felt sick to my stomach but couldn't look away from the dark hole. "Let's go back," Ming said, tugging at my arm. "If we get caught, we'll be in trouble." I reluctantly followed him back toward the dorms, but kept looking over my shoulder at the lake. The sounds faded as we walked away, but I couldn't forget them. "Do you know anything about that hole?" I asked as we neared our building. Ming hesitated. "I've heard rumors. My cousin went to school here 2 years ago. He said that hole leads to the basement of the old Audi building." "The one that's always locked?" "Yeah, apparently the basement is chained up. No one's allowed down there." I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard those groans again. The next morning at breakfast, I must have looked terrible because our instructor, Mr. Tan, asked if I was feeling all right. "Just tired, sir," I mumbled. We had free time after lunch, so I convinced Ming to check out the old Audi building with me. It was the oldest structure on campus, a colonial-style building that had been partially renovated but still retained its original architecture. The main entrance was open, but when we tried to find stairs leading down, we discovered a heavy door with multiple padlocks. "Told you," Ming said. "Nobody goes down there." As we were leaving, we ran into Uncle Lee, the elderly maintenance worker who'd been at the school for decades. He smiled when he saw us. "What are you boys doing in here?" he asked, not unkindly. "Not many students visit this old building anymore." "We were just exploring," I said carefully. "Sir, do you know anything about the hole at the bottom of the lake?" Something changed in Uncle Lee's expression, just for a second, before his smile returned. "Ah, you saw that. Not many people do. The fountains usually keep the water too disturbed to see it clearly." "What is it?" Ming asked. Uncle Lee leaned in. "That hole connects to the basement of this building. When the school was first built, they created an underground passage from here to the other side of the campus. The hole was for ventilation." "Have you ever been down there?" I asked. Uncle Lee nodded. "Many years ago when I first started working here. The basement is sealed now, but I've been down there for maintenance." I swallowed hard before asking, "Did you ever hear anything strange, like groaning sounds?" Uncle Lee's smile disappeared completely. He studied my face intently. "You heard them?" A chill ran down my spine. "Last night, when we looked at the hole." "I've heard them too," he said quietly. "Much clearer down in the basement, especially at night." Ming looked between us, clearly confused. "I didn't hear anything." "Not everyone can," Uncle Lee said. "Some people are more sensitive to these things." "Are there ghosts in this school?" I asked directly. Uncle Lee was quiet for a long moment. "I've worked here for 37 years. This place has history, not all of it good." He sighed deeply. "During a camp like yours many years ago, some students were curious about this building. They convinced me to show them around after hours." "What happened?" Ming asked. "We went into the basement. I shouldn't have taken them, but they were persistent. We heard the sounds like you described, groaning, crying, and laughter." Uncle Lee's voice dropped almost to a whisper. "One boy said he saw something in the darkness. He described a room with... Uncle Lee suddenly stopped. The smile that had returned to his face faded again, and his eyes seemed to focus on something far away. "With what?" I prompted. He shook his head. "It doesn't matter now. It was a long time ago. He checked his watch. You boys should get back to your activities. Don't want your instructors looking for you. But what about the basement? I pressed. What's down there? Nothing now, Uncle Lee said firmly. Just old pipes and dust. The school sealed it up years ago for safety reasons. He started walking away, then turned back. Don't think too much about the hole, boy. Some things are better left alone. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about Uncle Lee's unfinished story. After lights out, I waited until Ming was asleep before sneaking out again. I know it was stupid, but I had to see the hole one more time. The lake was just as still as the previous night. The hole looked even darker somehow, a perfect black circle against the lighter bottom of the lake. I sat on a bench about 10 meters from the water and just stared at it. After about 20 minutes, an elderly Chinese man sat down beside me. I nearly jumped out of my skin. I hadn't heard him approach. "Can't sleep?" he asked. He wasn't wearing a school uniform or staff clothing, and I wondered how he'd gotten onto campus. "No, sir," I replied politely. "The lake is beautiful at night, isn't it?" he said, gazing out at the water. I nodded uncomfortably. "You're looking at the hole," he stated. It wasn't a question. My heart started beating faster. "Do you know what it is?" The man nodded slowly. During the Japanese occupation, this wasn't a school. The buildings were used as a headquarters for Japanese officers. That hole was once the entrance to a tunnel. A tunnel to where? To a room. His voice became very soft. A room where they took people who were suspected of being spies or resistance fighters. They did terrible things in that room. I felt cold despite the warm night. "Torture?" The man just nodded. When the Japanese left, the new authorities destroyed most of the tunnel, but they couldn't completely fill in the entrance. That's why the hole remains. "And the sounds?" I asked. "The groaning and laughing?" The man looked at me sharply. "You hear them?" "Yes, since yesterday." He was quiet for a long moment. Some wounds in history never fully heal. Some pain echoes through time. He stood up. "Be careful, young man. Those who can hear the echoes sometimes attract attention from those making the sounds." Before I could ask what he meant, he walked away, disappearing into the shadows of the trees surrounding the lake. I sat there frozen, unable to move. The groaning from the hole seemed louder now, more desperate, and the laughter. It sounded closer, as if whoever was laughing was no longer down in the hole, but somewhere nearby. I finally gathered the courage to get up and head back to the dorm. As I walked, I felt like someone was following me. Each time I looked back, there was nobody there, but the feeling persisted. The next morning at breakfast, I mentioned the old man to Uncle Lee when I saw him refilling the water dispenser. "What old man?" he asked, frowning. I described him in our conversation. Uncle Lee's face paled. "There was no elderly Chinese man on campus last night," he said. "All visitors have to check in at the security post, and no one did after 6 in the evening." "But I talked to him," I insisted. "He told me about the hole, said it was an entrance to a tunnel that led to a torture room during the Japanese occupation." Uncle Lee set down the water jug with shaking hands. "Who told you that? Those details aren't in any book or tour guide." "The old man did. He was sitting right next to me." Uncle Lee gripped my shoulder. "Listen to me. Stay away from that lake. Don't go near it again, especially at night." "Promise me?" I promised, but I could tell there was something he wasn't telling me. That afternoon, I tried researching the school's history, but found very little about the Japanese occupation period. It was like that part of the school's past had been deliberately erased. Our camp ended that day. As we were packing to leave, I noticed Ming staring at me oddly. "What?" I asked. "Who were you talking to last night?" he said. "What do you mean?" "I woke up around midnight and saw you weren't in your bed. I looked out the window and saw you sitting by the lake, talking to yourself." "I wasn't talking to myself," I said defensively. "There was an old man there." Ming shook his head. "Wei, I watched you for like 5 minutes. You were alone the whole time." I felt sick. Before I could respond, Uncle Lee appeared at our door with some paperwork for our instructor. As he was leaving, he slipped a small piece of paper into my hand. When I unfolded it later on the bus, it contained just one sentence. Those who hear the voices become visible to them. I've been having nightmares ever since. In them, I'm being dragged down into that hole at the bottom of the lake, toward a room filled with shadows and terrible tools. And always, there's that laughter, following me even after I wake up. Sometimes I think I see an old man watching me from a distance, but when I look again, he's gone. And at night, when everything is quiet, I swear I can still hear those groans, even though I'm kilometers away from that lake now. Story 16. I've never really shared this with anyone outside my family. Even now, years later, my hands are sweaty just thinking about typing this out, but I need to get it off my chest, and maybe someone here has experienced something similar. This happened about 5 years ago when I went back to my home country for my cousin Mira's wedding. I hadn't been back in almost 7 years, so it was a big deal for me. Everyone was staying at my grandparents' old house, this massive creaky place they've owned for like 50 years. It's in this small village where everybody knows each other, with fields on one side and a cemetery on the other. The house was packed with relatives from everywhere. Every bedroom, couch, and floor space was claimed. I ended up sharing a bed with my 2 younger cousins, Layla and Sarah, who were 14 and 16 at the time. The bed situation wasn't ideal. It was pushed against the corner of the room with the wall on one side. Directly across from it was this ancient wooden closet with a huge mirror attached to it, the kind that shows your whole body. The bedroom door was to the right of the closet. The wedding preparations had been exhausting. Everyone was running around getting things ready, and I'd been helping my aunt with cooking all day. By nighttime, I was completely wiped out. I remember falling asleep almost instantly after hitting the pillow, with Layla against the wall, me in the middle, and Sarah on the outer edge. I woke up in the middle of the night. I don't know what time it was exactly, probably around 3 in the morning. The room was dimly lit by moonlight coming through the thin curtains. The first thing I noticed was that I couldn't move at all. Not my arms, not my legs, nothing, just my eyes. I've had sleep paralysis before, so I recognized what was happening and tried not to panic. Usually I just wait it out, and it passes in a minute or two. But then I noticed the door was wide open. I was positive we'd closed it before going to bed because Sarah had complained about the hallway light. As I stared at the open doorway, trying to make sense of it, a small figure appeared. It was a little girl, maybe 7 or 8 years old. She had this perfect shoulder-length bob haircut with bangs. She was wearing what looked like a simple white dress or nightgown. It was hard to tell in the dim light. My first thought was that it was my little cousin Nia, who was staying in the room next door with my aunt. She sometimes got scared at night and would look for her mum. The girl just stood there in the doorway for what felt like forever, looking in our direction. Then she started walking slowly into the room, her movements kind of jerky and unnatural. She wandered toward the mirror, then back toward the bed, then back to the mirror again, like she was pacing but with no real purpose. I wanted to wake up Sarah or Layla, but I couldn't move or speak. I thought maybe if I concentrated hard enough, I could break out of the paralysis. That's when I realized, if this was Naya, why wasn't she saying anything? Why wasn't she calling for her mom or asking to climb into bed with us? I managed to shift my eyes to look at my cousins, and that's when the real terror hit me. Both of them were right there beside me, sound asleep. Layla was pressed against the wall, her back to me, and I could see Sarah's face on my other side, breathing deeply. If both my cousins were here, then who the hell was this girl? My heart started racing so hard I thought it might burst. The girl continued her strange pacing, but now she was getting closer to the bed each time. I kept thinking, wake up, wake up, wake up. But my body wouldn't respond. Then she did something that still gives me nightmares. She stopped at the foot of the bed, and without taking her eyes off me, she slowly grabbed the bed frame and pulled herself up. I could see her small hands gripping the wooden frame. She climbed onto the bed, right at our feet, and began crawling toward me on all fours. Her face, God, her face. It wasn't scary or deformed or anything like in horror movies. It was just empty, blank, like there was nothing behind her eyes, and she was smiling this tiny, slight smile that never changed as she crawled closer. She was about halfway up the bed when I finally broke free from the paralysis. I gasped for air like I'd been underwater and sat bolt upright, my heart thundering in my chest. The sudden movement woke Sarah, who mumbled something about me having a bad dream, but the girl was gone. The door was closed. The room was exactly as it had been when we went to sleep. I couldn't get back to sleep after that. I sat up in bed until the sun came up, watching the door and jumping at every creak and groan of the old house. I told myself it was just sleep paralysis mixed with hallucinations. That's what happens sometimes, right? Your brain plays tricks on you. When morning finally came, I was exhausted and shaky. At breakfast, I casually asked my aunt if Nia had trouble sleeping last night or if she'd been wandering around. My aunt looked confused and said no, Nia had slept through the night beside her. She'd been sick with a slight fever, so my aunt had been checking on her frequently. I tried to put it out of my mind. The wedding was in 2 days and there was still so much to do, but I couldn't shake the image of that little girl crawling toward me. It felt too real, too specific to be just a nightmare. That afternoon, I needed some air, so I decided to take a walk. My grandparents' house is right next to the village cemetery, like literally shares a stone wall with it. Growing up, we'd always visit our family graves whenever we came to stay. It was just something we did, keeping the graves clean and sometimes bringing flowers. I found myself walking along the familiar paths between the headstones. My great-grandparents are buried near the back, under this massive old tree. I'd been there countless times before, but this time, as I stood by their graves, something caught my eye. A smaller headstone about 3 meters away that I didn't remember seeing before. I don't know why, but I felt drawn to it. As I got closer, I saw it was a child's grave. There was a small, oval-shaped ceramic photo embedded in the stone, protected by glass, the kind they used to put on graves in my country decades ago. When I saw the photo, my blood turned to ice. It was her. The same little girl who had been in our room last night. The same bob haircut with bangs, the same slight smile, the same empty eyes. The headstone was old and weathered, but the photo was still clear enough that there was no mistaking her. I must have stood there frozen for several minutes. The inscription showed she had died in 1978. She would have been about 7 years old. I ran back to the house, my mind racing. When I got there, I found my grandmother in the kitchen preparing food for the wedding. My hands were still shaking as I asked her about the little girl's grave. "Grandma, who's that little girl buried near great-grandpa and great-grandma?" She stopped what she was doing and looked at me strangely. "You mean Eliza? Why are you asking about her?" I tried to sound casual. I just noticed her grave today and realized I've never heard about her before. My grandmother sighed and wiped her hands on her apron. "She was your grandfather's cousin's daughter. Such a tragedy. She fell down the well behind the old schoolhouse. By the time they found her, it was too late." I felt sick. Did she ever stay in this house?" "Of course. This house has been in the family for generations. Everyone has stayed here at some point." She looked at me more closely. "Amara, you're white as a sheet. What's going on?" I couldn't hold it in anymore. I told her everything. The sleep paralysis, the little girl walking into the room, her climbing onto the bed and finding her grave. As I spoke, my grandmother's expression changed from concern to something else, recognition. "You're not the first," she said quietly. "Your aunt saw her too, when she was about your age, and my sister before that." "What does it mean?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. My grandmother shook her head. "In our culture, the dead sometimes visit the living when they have unfinished business, or when they want to make a connection. Eliza was always a lonely child in life. Perhaps in death, she still seeks companionship. But why me? Why now? Who knows why spirits do what they do? Maybe she was drawn to you because you're from far away, or maybe it's just your time to know about her. She patted my hand. Don't be afraid. She never harmed anyone. That didn't exactly make me feel better. For the rest of my stay, I refused to sleep in that room. I made excuses about the bed being too crowded and slept on the couch in the living room instead. I kept all the lights on and barely slept. The wedding went well, but I couldn't wait to leave. When I finally got back home, I thought I'd put it all behind me. But sometimes when I'm on the edge of sleep, I swear I can feel a small depression at the foot of my bed, like someone small is sitting there. And occasionally, out of the corner of my eye, I catch a glimpse of a little girl with a perfect bob haircut, watching me with those empty eyes. I still don't know if what I experienced was real or just a vivid hallucination triggered by family stories I might have heard and forgotten. But I've never had sleep paralysis again since that night, and I've never gone back to my grandparents' house. Story 17. I've always loved camping alone. There's something about being by yourself in nature that just resets everything in your brain. My friends think I'm crazy for going solo, especially since I prefer the more isolated spots, but I've been doing this for years without any issues. Well, until what happened last March, I'd been planning this trip for weeks. Winter had been brutal, and I was desperate to get back outdoors now that temperatures were finally climbing above freezing. I chose this spot near White Rock that I discovered last fall. It's this amazing overlook about 45 minutes hiking distance from where you park your car, far enough that casual hikers don't bother, which means total privacy. That day started out perfect. I left work early on Friday, drove the 2 hours to the trailhead, and started hiking in around 4 in the afternoon. The forest was still pretty bare, with patches of snow in the shaded areas, but you could feel spring trying to break through. The air had that fresh, earthy smell that comes right after winter. I reached my spot around 5:30, just as the sun was starting to set. The light was amazing, all gold and pink across the valley. From the overlook, you can see for miles over the forest below. That's why I love this spot so much. It feels like you're on top of the world. Setting up camp didn't take long. I've got my routine down to a science now. Tent up, sleeping bag rolled out, gear organized. I was planning to spend 2 nights, so I wanted everything comfortable. By the time I finished, it was getting darker, and I needed to gather firewood before I lost daylight completely. That's when I noticed it. Down in the valley below my overlook, maybe half a mile away, there was a campfire burning. At first I didn't think much of it. Other campers, whatever. But as I looked closer, I realized something was off. There was no tent visible, no chairs, no cooler, nothing that would indicate someone was actually camping there. Just this fire, burning by itself in a clearing. I grabbed my binoculars from my backpack to get a better look. The fire wasn't just small either. It was a decent size, and as I watched, it seemed to be getting bigger. This wasn't some dying campfire left by hikers. Someone had deliberately stacked logs to keep it going, to make it grow. I kept watching for about an hour as it got completely dark. Most fires would start dying down if left unattended, but this one was definitely getting larger. I could see flames shooting higher, and occasionally I'd catch glimpses of what looked like fresh wood being consumed. It was as if someone had set it up to gradually increase in size. By now, I was getting seriously concerned. We hadn't had rain in over a week, and even though it was early March, the forest floor was dry enough that a spreading fire could be a real problem. Plus, the whole situation felt wrong. Who builds a fire that big and then just leaves it? I debated what to do for probably 20 minutes. Part of me wanted to just mind my own business. Another part was genuinely worried about a forest fire. Eventually, I decided I needed to check it out, if only to make sure it wasn't going to spread. I grabbed my headlamp, water bottle, and a small shovel I always bring camping. The hike down from my overlook was steeper than I remembered, and in the dark, it took me about 25 minutes to reach the area where I'd spotted the fire. When I got there, the situation was even stranger up close. The fire was built in a clearing, but not in any existing fire pit. Someone had cleared a space, surrounded it with rocks, and then stacked logs in a way that would ensure the fire would grow larger over time. Some logs were positioned at the edges, not yet burning, but clearly placed to fall into the flames as the fire expanded. This wasn't accidental. This was deliberate. I stood there for a minute, trying to understand what I was seeing. There were no footprints visible in the patchy snow nearby, no beer cans or food wrappers, nothing to indicate who had been there or why they'd built this fire. The flames were getting dangerously high now, with sparks floating up toward the tree branches overhead. I couldn't just leave it burning. Using my shovel, I started scraping soil onto the edges of the fire, working my way inward. It took me almost 30 minutes of careful work to get it under control. The heat was intense, and I kept having to back away as flames would suddenly flare up. Finally, I managed to smother most of it and drag away the unburned logs that had been positioned to fall in. My hands were filthy, my face was sweaty despite the cold night air, and I felt completely unsettled. The whole time I was putting out the fire, I kept looking over my shoulder. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The forest was too quiet. No owls, no rustling, nothing. Just silence and darkness beyond the reach of my headlamp. Once I was sure the fire was out, I started heading back up to my campsite. That's when the feeling got worse. Every step I took, I felt like someone was following me. I'd stop and listen, but there was never anything to hear, just that unnatural silence. By the time I reached my camp again, I was spooked enough that I decided I wasn't staying. Maybe I was overreacting, but something about that fire and the whole situation felt wrong on a level I can't really explain. It was like walking into a trap that hadn't quite sprung yet. I started packing up my gear as quickly as I could. Sleeping bags stuffed haphazardly into its sack, tent poles practically bent as I jammed them into their bag. I didn't even bother organizing things properly, just shoved everything into my backpack. That's when I saw them. I was folding my tent when movement caught my eye at the edge of my campsite. I straightened up and switched my headlamp to its brightest setting, pointing it toward the trees. There was a figure standing there, maybe 50 yards away, just standing, watching me. "Hey!" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "Was that your fire down there?" No response. The figure didn't move. "That was dangerous, man. It could have spread." My voice echoed slightly in the night air. Still nothing. They just stood there, a dark silhouette against the trees. I couldn't make out any features, whether it was a man or woman, young or old, just a human shape watching me. I tried one more time. "Hello? Can you hear me?" The figure remained motionless. At this point, my heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I turned back to my half-packed gear and started shoving everything in faster, keeping the person in my peripheral vision the whole time. Every few seconds, I'd glance up. They never moved closer, but they never left either, just stood there, watching me pack. I kept thinking about that fire, how it had been set up to grow larger over time, how there had been no camping equipment around it, how it might have been visible from my overlook site. Had they used the fire to lure me away from my camp? Was that the plan? I finished packing in record time, probably forgetting half my smaller items in the process. I didn't care. I just needed to get out of there. With my pack secured, I grabbed my flashlight in one hand and my pocket knife in the other. I took one last look around the campsite to make sure I hadn't left anything essential, then turned toward the trail that would lead me back to my car. The figure was still there, now positioned so they were between me and the path I needed to take. I'm not ashamed to admit that I was terrified at this point. I was alone, at least 45 minutes from my car, in the dark, with a silent stranger blocking my way. I decided to take a different route, longer, but avoiding where they stood. I started walking briskly in the opposite direction, planning to circle around and hit the main trail further down. As I moved, I kept looking back. The figure turned to watch me go, but didn't follow, at least not that I could see. I walked for about 10 minutes through rougher terrain before finding another game trail that I knew would eventually connect with the main path. The entire hike back to my car was the longest 45 minutes of my life. Every snapping twig made me jump. Every shadow looked like a person. I kept my flashlight sweeping left and right, convinced someone was stalking me through the trees. When I finally reached my car, I threw my pack in the back seat, jumped in, locked the doors, and started the engine all in one frantic motion. The headlights illuminated the empty trailhead parking area. No other vehicles, no people, nothing. I drove home that night instead of finding a motel. 2 hours of white-knuckle driving, checking my rearview mirror constantly. I didn't feel safe until I was back in my apartment with the door locked. I reported what happened to the park rangers and local police the next day. They took my statement but didn't seem overly concerned. They said they'd check the area but doubted they'd find anything. I'm not sure they ever did. I still don't know what that person wanted. Was the fire a lure to get me away from my camp so they could go through my stuff? Were they trying to start a forest fire? Or was it something worse? Was I supposed to be distracted by the fire while they approached my camp? I haven't been camping alone since then. I probably never will again. Sometimes I still wake up at night thinking about that silent figure just standing there watching me, and I wonder what would have happened if I'd decided to stay. Story 18. I'd been going through a really rough patch. My girlfriend of 4 years had left me. I'd lost my job due to company downsizing, and I was drowning in student debt. Everything felt like it was crashing down at once. I've always found that hiking helps clear my head when life gets overwhelming, so I decided to take a day trip to Ravenswood. It's about an hour drive from my apartment, and I'd hiked there a few times before, though never alone. That morning started like any other hiking day. I woke up around 6, packed some trail mix, a couple sandwiches, and filled my 2-liter water reservoir. I threw in my first aid kit, compass, and knife, all the usual stuff. I remember specifically checking the weather forecast. Clear skies, mid-60s, perfect hiking weather. I even told my buddy Tyler where I was going, just to be safe. "I'll be back before dark," I texted him. "Just need to clear my head." I hit the trailhead around 8:30 in the morning. The parking lot had a few cars, but not many. It was a Tuesday after all. I chose the Eagle Ridge Trail, a 12-mile loop that would take me deep into the forest and up to a ridge with a pretty awesome view of the valley. The first few hours were completely normal. I passed a couple of other hikers early on, exchanged the usual nods and beautiful day comments, but after the trail fork about 4 miles in, I was completely alone. I remember checking my watch around 1 in the afternoon. I'd made good time and was at the highest point of the ridge. I sat down on a flat rock, ate one of my sandwiches, and just stared out at the valley below. For the first time in weeks, I felt peaceful. The world seemed right again. I wish I'd just turned around and headed back at that point, but I was determined to complete the loop. The descent from the ridge is where things started to feel off. I first noticed the silence. If you spend any time in forests, you know they're never actually quiet. There's always background noise. Birds, insects, leaves rustling, distant animal calls. But as I continued down the trail, I realized I couldn't hear anything except my own breathing and footsteps. No birds, no rustling, nothing. I remember stopping and just listening, thinking maybe I was imagining it, but no, the forest was absolutely silent. I felt this weird pressure in my ears, like when you're on an airplane and need to pop them, but they won't pop. I shook it off and kept walking, but that silence made my skin crawl. Around 3:30, I reached a small clearing about a mile from the end of the loop. I decided to take a quick water break before the final stretch. I was sitting on a fallen log, drinking water, when I felt something, a change in the air. It's hard to explain, but it was like the atmosphere shifted. The hairs on my arms stood up. That's when I saw it. At the far edge of the clearing, partially hidden by the tree line, stood something I still can't fully explain. At first glance, I thought it was a bear standing on its hind legs, but as my eyes focused, I realized it was all wrong. It was too tall, easily 7 feet. Its proportions were just incorrect. It had patchy fur that looked diseased, with large areas of exposed skin that seemed grey and almost scaly in the afternoon light. Its limbs were too long, especially its arms, which hung down almost to where knees would be. I froze completely. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The thing wasn't moving, just standing there at the edge of the trees watching me. I kept trying to rationalize it. Maybe it was a bear with mange, or maybe my eyes were playing tricks in the dappled forest light. But deep down, I knew this wasn't any animal I'd ever seen or heard of. Then it made a sound. Not a growl exactly, more like, God, I don't even know how to describe it. A guttural wet noise that started low and then rose in pitch until it was almost a whine, but distorted somehow, like something trying to mimic an animal sound but getting it wrong. That sound broke through my paralysis, sending ice through my veins. I slowly stood up, never taking my eyes off the thing. It remained motionless, but I swear I could feel it watching me, studying me. I backed away, one careful step at a time, toward the trail that would lead me back to the parking lot. That's when I heard the rustling, not from where the creature stood, but from behind me, then to my left, then my right. There were sounds all around me now, movement in the underbrush circling my position. I had the horrifying realization that there might be more than one of these things. The forest that had been unnaturally silent was now alive with sounds, twigs snapping, leaves crunching, and that same wet, guttural noise coming from multiple directions. I couldn't see anything except the first creature, which still hadn't moved from its spot, but I could sense others closing in. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought it might burst. Sweat was pouring down my face despite the cool air. I kept backing up until I hit the trail, then I turned and ran. I've never run so fast in my life. I didn't look back, didn't stop to catch my breath. I just ran. The sounds followed me, not right behind me, but paralleling me through the woods on either side of the trail. They were keeping pace with me, but not getting closer, almost like they were herding me. About half a mile down the trail, I heard heavy footsteps directly behind me. Against every instinct, I glanced back over my shoulder. What I saw made me stumble and nearly fall. A massive silhouette was loping down the trail about 50 yards behind me. In the dim forest light, all I could make out clearly were its eyes. They seemed to reflect light in an unnatural way, gleaming yellow-green like a cat's eyes, but much larger. I pushed myself harder, lungs burning, legs screaming in pain. The trail curved sharply to the right, and as I rounded the bend, I caught a glimpse of something moving through the trees to my left. It was keeping pace with me easily, making those terrible wet sounds as it moved. The worst part was how they moved. Not like animals, but not quite like humans either. There was something deeply wrong about their gait, jerky and fluid at the same time, like watching a stop-motion animation that's slightly off. I kept running, even as branches slashed at my face, and I nearly twisted my ankle twice on exposed roots. The sounds continued all around me, sometimes closer, sometimes further away. I had this overwhelming sense that they were toying with me, that they could have caught me at any point but were choosing not to. After what felt like hours, but was probably only 15 or 20 minutes, I saw the trailhead through the trees. The parking lot was just ahead. I sprinted the final stretch, expecting at any moment to feel claws or hands grab me from behind, but nothing did. I burst out of the tree line into the parking lot, gasping for breath, my legs nearly giving out beneath me. My car was the only one left. The sun was starting to set, casting long shadows across the asphalt. I fumbled with my keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get them into the lock. As I finally got the door open, I allowed myself one final look back at the forest. The tree line was still, no movement, no sound. But I could feel eyes on me, dozens of them watching from just within the shadows of the trees. I jumped into my car, locked the doors, and peeled out of there so fast I left rubber on the asphalt. The entire drive home, I kept checking my rearview mirror, convinced I'd see something following me. I called Tyler as soon as I had cell service, but I couldn't bring myself to tell him what had happened. I just said the hike took longer than expected and I was on my way back. When I got home, I locked every door and window in my apartment. I took the longest, hottest shower of my life, trying to wash away the feeling of those eyes on me. I had scratches all over my arms and face from branches, and my muscles ached from running so hard, but I was physically okay. Mentally, though, I'm still not right. I've tried to convince myself it was just a bear with mange or some other explainable animal. I've researched every possible native species in that forest. Nothing matches what I saw. I've thought about reporting it to the park rangers. But what would I say? That I saw monsters in the woods? They'd think I was crazy or on drugs. I haven't been hiking since. I can't even bring myself to walk in the small wooded park near my apartment. At night, I still have dreams about that clearing, about those eyes watching me from the tree line. Sometimes in the dreams, I don't make it out of the forest. I wake up gasping for air, convinced I can hear that wet, guttural sound outside my window. The thing that haunts me most is the feeling I had while running, that they weren't trying to catch me. They were escorting me out of their territory, warning me. And somehow that's more terrifying than if they had attacked me outright, because it means they were intelligent enough to make that choice. I don't know what's in Ravenswood Forest. I don't want to know, but I know it's not natural, not normal, and I know it's still there, watching from the trees, waiting for the next person to wander too deep into the woods alone. I still haven't told anyone the full story until now. I'm not sure why I'm even writing this, maybe as a warning, maybe just to convince myself I'm not crazy. All I know is that whatever I encountered that day changed me forever. And sometimes, when the wind blows just right at night, I swear I can hear that sound again, calling from somewhere in the darkness. Story 19. I still can't believe how stupid we were back in high school. I mean, who spends their weekend nights hanging out in a cemetery? We did. Me and my group of friends thought we were so edgy, so cool. It was our thing for almost the entire junior year, sneaking into Oakwood Cemetery after dark, sitting on gravestones, and trying to scare each other with ghost stories. We never really believed any of it would come back to haunt us until that night. It was late October, probably around 2 weeks before Halloween. The night had that perfect chill that makes your breath visible, and the moon was almost full, casting everything in this weird bluish light. There were 5 of us that night, me, Thomas, Marcus, Ellie, David, and Jess. We'd done this so many times that it had become routine. Hop the fence at the east corner where the security light had burned out months ago, make our way to the center of the cemetery where there was this crumbling stone wall, and set up our usual spot. We had our flashlights, some snacks, and a couple bottles of cheap beer that David's older brother had bought us. Nothing crazy, just enough to give us that slight buzz that made everything seem more exciting than it actually was. I remember being quieter than usual that night. Something felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it, but from the moment we scaled that fence, I had this prickling feeling at the back of my neck, like someone was watching us. I kept turning around, aiming my flashlight behind us, but saw nothing. "Dude, what's your problem?" Marcus had asked, laughing as I swung around for the 3rd time in 5 minutes. "I don't know," I'd replied, trying to keep my voice casual. "Just feels weird tonight." "You're such a baby," Ellie had teased, but I noticed she was hugging herself tighter than usual. We made it to our spot and took up our usual positions on the wall. It was covered in moss and always felt damp, even on dry nights. I settled in between Marcus and Jess, my back to the older section of the cemetery, the part where the graves dated back to the early 1900s, where the headstones were weathered and tilting at odd angles. That was my first mistake. We went through our usual ritual, flashlights under our chins, taking turns telling the scariest stories we could come up with. David was in the middle of some convoluted tale about a hitchhiker when I first felt it. A cold spot right between my shoulder blades, like someone had pressed an ice cube against my spine. I shifted uncomfortably, trying to focus on David's story, but I couldn't shake the feeling. Then I heard it, a soft scraping sound, like something being dragged across dirt. I tried to tell myself it was just the wind moving fallen leaves, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. When it was my turn to tell a story, I couldn't concentrate. My eyes kept drifting over my shoulder toward the older section of the cemetery. The darkness there seemed thicker somehow, more complete than anywhere else. "Earth to Thomas," Jess nudged me. "You gonna tell a story or just stare into space all night?" I forced a laugh and started some half-assed story about a haunted house I'd read online, but my heart wasn't in it. My eyes kept being drawn back to that dark corner of the cemetery, and that's when I saw it. At first I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, a shadow moving among shadows, but then it rose. I don't know how else to describe it. It didn't stand up like a person stands up. It rose from the ground in this slow, deliberate way that made my stomach turn, like someone was pulling a puppet up from the earth by strings. It was tall, taller than any normal person should be, and hunched in a way that seemed painful. I couldn't make out any features, just this dark silhouette against the slightly less dark background of the cemetery. My voice died in my throat. I just pointed, my hand shaking so badly I couldn't keep it steady. "Guys," I finally managed to choke out, "look." They all turned, following my finger. For a moment, there was complete silence. Then Marcus whispered, "What the fuck is that?" The figure had begun to move, not walking exactly, more like gliding, taking these slow, measured steps toward the rear gate of the cemetery. Each movement was wrong somehow, too fluid in some parts, too jerky in others, like its joints weren't working properly. "Is someone fucking with us?" David hissed, but his voice was high with fear. Nobody answered. We all just watched, frozen, as this thing moved through the gravestones, heading away from us but somehow still feeling too close. I don't know who moved first. Maybe it was Ellie, who suddenly let out this strangled sob. Maybe it was me, as I felt my legs tensing without any conscious decision. But suddenly we were all running, scrambling off that wall and sprinting toward the fence we'd climbed over. I've never run so fast in my life. My lungs were burning, and I could hear the others gasping for breath around me. Nobody looked back. Nobody dared. We just ran like our lives depended on it, because in that moment we all believed they did. We made it to the fence and practically threw ourselves over it, not caring about the scrapes and tears from the metal. We didn't stop running until we reached David's car, which was parked 2 blocks away. We all piled in, slamming the doors and locking them immediately. For a minute, we just sat there, panting, looking at each other with wide eyes. "Did everyone see that?" I finally asked, my voice shaking. They all nodded. No one could describe exactly what we'd seen, but we all saw something. Something that shouldn't have been there. Something that moved wrong. "We're never going back there," Ellie said firmly, and no one disagreed. David drove us all home in silence. I remember sitting in the back seat, staring out the window, feeling like my world had tilted slightly off its axis. Everything looked the same, but nothing felt right anymore. The next day, Marcus didn't show up at school. When I texted him, his mom replied saying he was sick with a fever. When he came back 3 days later, he looked awful, pale and shaky with dark circles under his eyes. "I can't sleep," he told me in a hollow voice when I asked if he was okay. "Every time I close my eyes, I see that thing moving toward me." I tried to comfort him, but how do you comfort someone when you're just as freaked out as they are? We all were. We stopped hanging out as much after that night. It was like we couldn't look at each other without remembering. 2 weeks passed. Halloween came and went, but none of us felt like celebrating. The usual thrill of being scared had lost its appeal entirely. We'd experienced real fear, and there was nothing fun about it. Then one morning, I was flipping through the local newspaper my dad still insisted on getting delivered, and I saw something that made my blood run cold. There was a small article, barely more than a paragraph, about a man who had been found sleeping in Oakwood Cemetery. According to the article, cemetery workers had discovered him curled up on a grave in the older section. The grave belonged to his wife, who had died 6 months earlier. The man was described as elderly and disoriented, and had been taken to the hospital for evaluation. There was a quote from one of the workers saying they believed he'd been sleeping there for weeks, possibly months, based on the personal items they found stashed nearby. I must have read that paragraph 20 times, trying to make sense of it. Could that have been what we saw? just a grieving old man. But that didn't explain the way it moved, the unnatural height, the feeling of wrongness that had permeated the air. I called Marcus immediately and read him the article. "That wasn't what we saw," he said flatly. "No way." But what if it was? I pressed. What if he was just standing up from the grave where he'd been sleeping, in the dark, from a distance? "Thomas," Marcus cut me off, his voice tight with suppressed emotion. "That thing was not human. I was closest to it. I saw it clearer than any of you. And I'm telling you that was not a person. I didn't know what to believe. Part of me wanted it to be the old man, a sad but logical explanation that would let me sleep at night. But another part knew Marcus was right. What we'd seen that night defied explanation. We tried to move on, finish high school, go to college, live normal lives. But that night in the cemetery changed something in all of us. I still can't walk past a graveyard without feeling that cold spot between my shoulder blades. Marcus dropped out of college after his first semester, said he couldn't handle being away from home. Last I heard, he was working at his dad's hardware store, still living in his childhood bedroom. Ellie seems okay on the surface. She's got a good job, a fiancé. But she calls me sometimes late at night just to talk, just to remind herself that someone else saw it too, that she's not crazy. David and Jess I've lost touch with entirely. They both moved away after graduation and never looked back. I don't blame them. As for me, I've spent years trying to rationalize what happened. Was it mass hysteria, a trick of the light, a grieving old man who in our fear and imagination became something monstrous? Or was it something else entirely? Something that rose from a grave on a cold October night, moving in ways nothing living should move? I don't have answers. I just know that sometimes, when I'm drifting off to sleep, I see it again, rising from the earth. And I wonder if somewhere, in that old cemetery, it's still there, waiting for the next group of stupid teenagers who think it's fun to mess around with things they don't understand. Every year around Halloween, I drive by Oakwood Cemetery. I never stop, never get out of my car. I just slow down as I pass the east corner, where the fence is still easy to climb, and sometimes, just for a second, I think I see something moving among the gravestones, something tall and hunched, something watching. Maybe it's just my imagination. Maybe it's just shadows and regret, and the lingering effects of one terrifying night. Or maybe it's a reminder that some boundaries aren't meant to be crossed, and some places should be left in peace. All I know for sure is that I'll never set foot in a cemetery after dark again. Some lessons you only need to learn once. Story 20. I've been meaning to write this down for a while. I keep telling myself there must be some logical explanation, but I'm not so sure anymore. This happened to me about 7 months ago at the Oxford Bar in Snohomish. I've lived in the area my whole life, and everyone knows about the Oxford's reputation. I just never thought I'd experience anything myself. For those who aren't familiar, the Oxford is this old building downtown that dates back to the late 1800s. It's a typical small-town bar with decent food, pool tables, and cheap drinks. But it's also known for other things. There have been at least 2 or 3 deaths there over the years. One guy got stabbed in a fight back in the 80s, and I think someone fell down the stairs and broke their neck in the 90s. There are rumors about others, but those are the ones I know happened for sure. I'm not normally one for ghost stories or supernatural stuff. I'm the guy who rolls his eyes when someone starts talking about paranormal activity. But what happened that night in February has had me questioning everything. It was a Tuesday evening, around 8 o'clock. I remember because I had just finished a brutal shift at the warehouse where I work. My shoulders were killing me, and all I wanted was a drink and maybe some of their loaded fries. The place wasn't busy, just a handful of regulars watching some basketball game on the TV above the bar. The main floor was pretty full, so I decided to head downstairs to the basement bar. It's quieter down there, with a couple of pool tables and an older, smaller bar. The basement has this weird vibe to it. The ceiling is low and the lighting is terrible, just a few dim bulbs that cast these long shadows across the room. The air always feels heavy and stale, like it's trapped down there. When I got downstairs, there were only 3 other people, a couple playing pool in the corner and this older guy nursing a beer at the bar. The bartender, Megan, was scrolling through her phone. She's worked there for years. I nodded at her and she already knew what I wanted. Jack and Coke and an order of fries. "Rough day?" she asked as she slid the drink across to me. "You have no idea," I replied, taking a big sip. I settled onto a stool a few feet away from the old guy and checked my phone. That's when I first noticed the temperature drop. It wasn't gradual. It was like someone had suddenly opened a freezer door right next to me. My arms broke out in goosebumps, and I could see my breath fogging slightly in front of my face. I looked at Megan. Did the heat go out or something? She glanced up from her phone with this weird expression. Not surprised, just resigned. "It does that sometimes. It'll warm up in a minute." She was right. Within about 30 seconds, the temperature returned to normal. I shrugged it off and went back to my drink. The couple finished their game of pool and headed upstairs, leaving just me, the old guy, and Megan. That's when I started hearing it, this faint scratching sound coming from somewhere behind the bar. It was rhythmic, like fingernails dragging slowly across wood. Scratch, scratch, pause, scratch, scratch, pause. "You hear that?" I asked Megan. "Probably just pipes," she said without looking up. "This building makes all kinds of noises." But it didn't sound like pipes to me. It sounded deliberate. My food arrived, brought down by one of the servers from upstairs. I tried to focus on eating, but the scratching continued, getting slightly louder. The old guy must have heard it too, because he finished his beer quickly, left some cash on the counter, and shuffled toward the stairs without a word. As I ate, I felt something brush against my back. I turned, expecting to see someone walking past, but there was nobody there, just empty space. I told myself it was just a draft, but the air was completely still. By this point, I was starting to feel uneasy. I decided to finish my drink and head out. That's when Megan asked if I wanted another, and against my better judgment, I said yes. This time I ordered a glass of red wine. I don't usually drink wine, but something about that basement made me want something different. Megan poured the wine into this standard bar wine glass. Nothing fancy, just a regular glass with a stem. As she slid it across to me, I swear I saw something move in the reflection of the dark liquid. Just a quick shadow, there and gone. I picked up the glass and took a sip. The wine tasted off, slightly metallic, almost coppery. I was about to ask Megan if it had gone bad when I heard footsteps overhead. Heavy, deliberate steps that didn't match the casual movement you'd expect in a bar. They started at one end of the ceiling and moved slowly to the other, then stopped directly above me. "Is there an office up there?" I asked Megan, pointing upward. She frowned. "No, that's just the main bar area. Someone's walking around up there. Sounds heavy." She shrugged. "Place is full of people. Probably just someone moving around." But these weren't normal footsteps. They were too measured, too deliberate, and they had stopped right above me. I took another sip of wine, trying to calm my nerves. That's when I felt someone sit down next to me. I turned, expecting to see another customer, but the stool was empty. Yet I could have sworn I felt the presence of someone sitting there. The slight shift in the air, the feeling of being watched. The scratching noise had stopped, but now there was a faint whispering sound coming from somewhere behind the bar. It was too quiet to make out any words, just a soft, continuous murmur. Megan disappeared into the back room to get more ice, leaving me alone in the basement. The moment she was gone, the lights flickered, once, twice, 3 times, before steadying again. The whispering grew slightly louder, and I could almost make out words, but not quite. My phone, which had been at 60% battery, suddenly died. The screen went black, and when I tried to turn it back on, nothing happened. That's when the temperature dropped again, much colder than before. I could see my breath clearly now, and my fingers felt numb around the wine glass. I was about to get up and leave when it happened. I was holding my wine glass, about halfway through the drink, when there was this sharp pop sound, like a light bulb burning out. The cup portion of my wine glass completely shattered. One second I was holding a glass of wine and the next I was just holding the stem. But here's the thing that still freaks me out. There was no wine spilled, no glass on the counter, no glass on the floor, no wine on my clothes, nothing. It was like the entire cup and its contents had just vanished. I sat there frozen, staring at the stem in my hand. It wasn't broken or jagged. It looked like it had been cleanly separated from the cup, as if it had been designed that way. Megan came back and I held up the stem, still in shock. My glass, it just exploded or something, I stammered. But there's no glass anywhere, and the wine, it's gone. I expected her to be surprised, confused, maybe even accuse me of trying to get out of paying. Instead, she just nodded, took the stem from my hand and said, "Yeah, that kind of stuff happens here," in the most casual tone imaginable, like I'd just told her the ketchup was empty. She grabbed a fresh glass, poured me another wine, and went back to wiping down the counter as if nothing unusual had happened. "Wait, what do you mean, that kind of stuff happens here?" I asked. Megan sighed, glancing around as if to make sure we were still alone. "Look, this place has a history. Things break, things go missing, people hear things." She lowered her voice. "Last month, a woman got locked in the bathroom upstairs. Door wouldn't open from either side. Took 3 guys to break it down. Week before that, all the plates in the kitchen fell off the shelves at the same time. Nobody was near them." "You're saying the place is haunted?" I asked, immediately feeling stupid for even saying it out loud. She shrugged. "I don't know what I'm saying. I just know weird shit happens here, always has." I didn't touch the new wine she poured me. My hands were shaking too much. I paid my tab, left a big tip, felt like the least I could do after having a minor freakout, and headed for the stairs. As I reached the bottom step, I felt a hand grab my shoulder. It was firm, 5 distinct fingers pressing into my flesh. I spun around, but there was nobody there, just the empty basement with Megan still behind the bar, not even looking in my direction. I practically ran up those stairs. When I got to the main floor, everything was normal. People laughing, music playing, the basketball game still on TV. It was like I'd stepped into a completely different world. I rushed outside, gulping the fresh air. My phone suddenly turned back on by itself, battery at 59%. I drove home in a daze, trying to make sense of what had happened. The next day, I convinced myself it must have been some kind of weird trick glass, or maybe the stem had a manufacturing defect, but I couldn't explain the missing wine, or the cold spots, or the hand on my shoulder. I called a buddy who knows the owner and casually asked about any strange happenings at the Oxford. He laughed and asked if I'd experienced something. Turns out the staff keeps a log of weird incidents. They've been doing it for years. Glasses breaking for no reason is apparently common enough that they have a specific column for it in their logbook. I haven't been back to the Oxford since that night. I drive past it almost daily, and sometimes I swear I can see someone watching from the upstairs window, just a dark shape standing completely still. But when I look again, it's gone. I don't know what happened to my wine glass that night. I don't know what causes the cold spots or the scratching sounds. All I know is that something in that basement didn't want me there, and it found a way to let me know. Story 21. I still can't believe I got this house for such a steal. Seriously, the price was almost too good to be true. A charming 2-bedroom on Maple Street with a front porch and a decent yard for nearly 30% below market value. When I asked my realtor about it, she just said the owner had recently passed away and the family wanted a quick sale. No drama, no backstory. Just an old lady who died and left behind a house that nobody wanted. I should have known better. The first week after moving in was pretty standard, unpacking boxes, arranging furniture, figuring out where everything should go. I didn't have much to begin with, just the basics I'd accumulated over the years in my apartment. The house itself was in surprisingly good condition. Apparently, the previous owner had kept it well maintained despite her age. I did find a few things in the basement that the family had left behind. Some old holiday decorations, tools, and this ancient wooden rocking chair. It was hand-carved, probably from the 50s or 60s, with these intricate leaf patterns on the armrests. Not really my style, too old-fashioned and kind of creepy looking. Plus, It had this weird water stain on the seat that looked vaguely like a human figure. I hauled it to the curb on trash day, along with some other junk I found. That's when the weirdness started. I'm absolutely obsessive about locking my front door. Always have been. Growing up, my mum would check the locks 3 times before bed, and I guess I inherited that habit. But about 2 weeks after moving in, I came home from work and found the front door unlocked. I figured I must have been in a rush that morning and forgotten. It happens, right? Except it happened again the next day and the day after that. And I know I locked that door. I even started double-checking it, standing there and tugging on the handle before leaving. But almost every day for a week, I'd come home to find it unlocked. I started wondering if someone had a key. Maybe the previous owner's family member, or perhaps the realtor forgot to mention a housekeeper who still thought they had access. I called the property management company and they assured me all keys had been accounted for and the locks had been changed before I moved in. I even set up my phone to record the door one morning just to see if I was going crazy. The video showed me clearly locking the door before leaving. But when I came home that evening, unlocked again. Last Friday, things escalated. I got home from work around 6 in the evening and the front door wasn't just unlocked, it was slightly ajar. Just an inch or so, but definitely open. My heart started racing immediately. Had someone broken in? Was there still someone inside? I stood on the porch for a few minutes, debating whether to call the police. In the end, I cautiously pushed the door open and stepped inside. Nothing seemed disturbed. My laptop was still on the coffee table. The TV was still mounted on the wall. Nothing valuable appeared to be missing. But then I heard it, a slow, rhythmic creaking coming from the basement. The kind of sound that makes your skin crawl. The kind of sound you hear in horror movies right before something terrible happens. Now, I'm not exactly brave. My first instinct was to run back outside and call 911. But curiosity got the better of me. I grabbed a baseball bat from my closet. I don't even play baseball, I just keep it for protection, and slowly made my way to the basement door. The creaking continued, steady and uninterrupted. With each step down the basement stairs, the sound grew louder. My palms were sweaty around the bat, and my heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The basement light was already on, which was another red flag because I know I hadn't left it on. And there it was, in the corner of my basement, the rocking chair, the same damn rocking chair I had thrown out 2 weeks earlier. It was gently rocking back and forth, as if someone had just stood up from it. I nearly fell backward up the stairs. That chair had been picked up by garbage collection. I had watched them take it away. There was absolutely no way it should be back in my basement. With trembling hands, I approached it. The creaking stopped as soon as I touched the chair. It was solid, real, not some hallucination. The same water stain was there on the seat, the same carved leaves on the armrests. It was unmistakably the same chair. I spent the rest of that evening calling friends, trying to figure out if someone was playing an elaborate prank on me. No one confessed, and honestly, none of my friends even knew about the chair in the first place. I hadn't mentioned it to anyone. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the chair, about the unlocked door, about the previous owner who had died in this house. Around 3 in the morning, I heard it again, the slow, rhythmic creaking from the basement. I lay in bed, paralyzed with fear. Every horror movie I'd ever seen flashed through my mind. The stupid protagonist who goes to investigate the strange noise always ends up dead. But the creaking continued, insistent, almost like it was calling to me. Finally, I got up. I grabbed my phone for the flashlight and to call for help if needed, and the baseball bat, and I crept down to the basement again. The light was on, just like before, but this time the chair wasn't empty. There was an elderly woman sitting in it, rocking slowly back and forth. She wore a faded floral dress that looked like it was from another era, with a cardigan draped over her thin shoulders, despite the summer heat. Her white hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and her hands, God, her hands were so gnarled with arthritis they barely looked human anymore, were folded peacefully in her lap. But it was her eyes that truly terrified me. They were cloudy, like she had cataracts, but also somehow vacant, staring straight ahead but not seeing anything, at least not anything in this world. I stood there, frozen, unable to move or speak. The bat slipped from my fingers and clattered to the floor. At the sound, the woman's head slowly turned toward me. Her eyes still didn't focus, but somehow I knew she was looking directly at me. Her mouth began to move like she was trying to speak, but no sound came out. We stared at each other for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only seconds. Then, between one blink and the next, she was gone. The chair was empty again, still rocking slightly as if someone had just stood up from it. I ran upstairs and locked myself in my bedroom until morning. I didn't sleep a wink. The next day, I called my realtor in a panic and demanded to know more about the previous owner. She was reluctant at first, citing privacy concerns, but must have heard the desperation in my voice. She finally told me the woman's name was Eleanor Martin, and she had lived in the house for over 50 years. She died peacefully in her sleep about 3 months before I bought the place. I spent the rest of the day researching Eleanor online. I found her obituary, which mentioned she was preceded in death by her husband, Robert, and survived by a son named Thomas. It also mentioned she was an avid gardener, which explained the immaculate flower beds in the backyard, and had been a kindergarten teacher before retiring. Through some social media stalking, I managed to find Thomas Martin's profile and sent him a message explaining that I'd bought his mother's house and had some questions. I didn't mention the chair or the apparition. I'm not that stupid. I just said I was curious about the history of the place. To my surprise, he responded within hours and agreed to meet me for coffee the next day. Thomas turned out to be a kind, middle-aged man with his mother's eyes, minus the cloudy, vacant look, thankfully. He seemed genuinely pleased that someone was interested in his mother's life. After some small talk, I casually brought up the rocking chair, describing it as something I'd found in the basement. The change in his expression was immediate. He went pale and set down his coffee cup with shaking hands. "You found the chair?" he asked. "We got rid of that thing 3 times after she died." According to Thomas, the rocking chair had been his father's gift to Eleanor on their first anniversary. After Robert died of a heart attack in the 70s, Eleanor spent most of her evenings in that chair, rocking and staring out the window as if waiting for him to come home. She'd even insisted on moving it to her bedroom in her final years so she could rock herself to sleep. After her death, Thomas and his wife had tried to sell the chair at an estate sale, but no one wanted it. They donated it to a thrift store, only to find it back in the basement when they came to clean the house a week later. Thinking they were losing their minds, they threw it out with the trash. A few days later, it reappeared again. The 3rd time, Thomas's son took the chair to the dump himself and watched as it was crushed in the compactor. They thought that was the end of it. Clearly, they were wrong. Thomas looked at me with sympathy when he saw my expression. "Mom loved that house more than anything," he said. "Dad built it for her when they got married. She always said she'd never leave it, even after she was gone." He paused. "I'm sorry if she's causing you trouble. She was stubborn, but she wasn't malicious." That night I sat in my living room, unable to stop thinking about Eleanor, about her life in this house, about her devotion to her husband, about her determination to stay, even after death. I thought about the unlocked door. Was she letting herself in to check on the place? Was the chair her way of making her presence known? Around midnight, I went down to the basement. The chair was there, still and silent in the corner. I approached it slowly, no longer afraid but filled with a strange sort of resolve. "Eleanor," I said, feeling ridiculous talking to an empty chair but pushing forward anyway. "I know this is your home and I respect that. I'm not here to push you out. You can stay as long as you don't scare me anymore. No more unlocking doors or appearing in the middle of the night, okay?" The chair started to rock, very gently, as if pushed by an invisible hand. I took that as agreement. The next day, I moved the chair from the basement to the living room, placing it by the window where Eleanor could look out at her garden. I've never seen her again, but sometimes, when I come home from work, I hear the gentle creaking of the chair rocking by itself. The front door stays locked now, though occasionally I'll find a window unlatched or the radio tuned to a station playing big band music from the 40s. It's been 6 months since that night, and I've made peace with my unusual housemate. I talk to her sometimes when I'm alone, telling her about my day or asking what she thinks about the changes I've made to the house. The chair never responds, of course, but sometimes it rocks a little faster, which I take as enthusiasm. I know how this sounds. I know most people would have run screaming from this house and never looked back. Sometimes I wonder if I should have done exactly that. But there's something strangely comforting about Eleanor's presence. She's not harmful, just a little stubborn, like her son said. She loved this house enough to stay, and I can respect that kind of devotion. So we've reached an understanding, Eleanor and I. This is her home, but she's letting me live in it. And in return, I keep her chair by the window and don't mind the occasional creaking at night. It's an arrangement that works for both of us, though I still check the locks twice before I go to bed. Old habits die hard, even when you're living with a ghost. Hi. Story 22. I still can't explain what happened in our apartment. Even after moving out, I get chills thinking about it. I'm writing this down partly because I need to get it off my chest, and partly because I'm hoping someone might have experienced something similar. It all started after my accident in April 2021. I was driving home with my dog Max when a car ran a red light and slammed into the driver's side of my car. The impact was so violent that my car flipped twice before landing on its side. I was trapped for about 45 minutes while emergency services worked to get me out. Here's where it gets weird. During those 45 minutes, I remember seeing this massive rainbow surrounding my car. Not like a normal rainbow in the sky. It was around me, like a protective bubble. The paramedics later told me it was a miracle that Max and I survived with only minor injuries. The driver's side was completely crushed, yet somehow I walked away with just a few bruises and a sprained wrist. Max didn't have a scratch on him. Life went back to normal after that, or so I thought. In October, my boyfriend Christopher moved in with me. We'd been dating for 2 years, and living together seemed like the natural next step. The apartment wasn't anything special, a modest 2-bedroom in an older building downtown. It had character with crown molding and hardwood floors, but nothing that screamed haunted. The first strange thing I noticed was our curtain lights. You know those fairy lights people hang on curtains? We had those in our bedroom. About a week after Christopher moved in, I was sitting on our bed reading when I noticed the lights swinging. Not just a gentle movement like you'd get from a draft. They were swinging back and forth like someone had deliberately pushed them. All the windows were closed. The AC wasn't running. There was literally no explanation for why they would move like that. I called Christopher over, and we both watched as the lights continued to swing for about 30 seconds before suddenly stopping. We tried to rationalize it. Maybe there was a weird air current in the apartment, maybe the building had shifted slightly. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. By January 2022, things escalated. Our electronics started behaving erratically. The TV would turn on by itself, usually around 3 in the morning. The first time it happened, I nearly had a heart attack. I was alone in the apartment. Christopher works night shifts at the hospital sometimes, and I woke up to the sound of voices coming from the living room. I thought someone had broken in. I grabbed my phone, ready to call 911, and crept down the hallway, only to find the TV on, playing some random infomercial at full volume. I turned it off, checked that all the doors and windows were locked, and went back to bed. But I couldn't sleep. The next morning I asked Christopher if he'd perhaps set a timer on the TV. He hadn't. Then our PlayStation 5 started turning on by itself, not just once or twice. This became a regular occurrence. We'd be in the kitchen making dinner, and we'd hear the distinctive beep of the console powering up, or we'd be in bed, and that sound would echo through the apartment. Every single time we'd go check, and sure enough, the PlayStation would be on, even though neither of us had touched the controller. One night in February, I was working late on a project. I shut down my entire work setup, laptop, monitor, keyboard, and went to bed around midnight. At 3:15 in the morning, I woke up to the sound of typing. I nudged Christopher, but he was fast asleep. The sound was coming from our spare room where I had my office set up. I tiptoed to the doorway and felt my blood run cold. My entire work setup was powered on, the monitor displaying my desktop, the laptop humming away, and the keyboard. The keyboard was illuminated with its RGB lighting, cycling through colors like it does when it's active. But there was nobody there, nobody typing. I stood there frozen, watching as the mouse cursor moved slightly on the screen. I'm not proud of what I did next, but I slammed the door shut and ran back to our bedroom. I woke Christopher up practically in tears and made him check the office. By the time we got back there, everything was normal. The computer was still on, but the keyboard had stopped its light show and the mouse cursor was stationary. The auditory phenomena were the most unsettling for me. I work from home most days, and Christopher leaves for work around 8 in the morning. At least 3 times a week, I'd hear him coughing in the living room around 10 or 11, even though I knew he was at work. The first few times, I actually called out to him before realizing my mistake. It wasn't just any cough, it was Christopher's distinctive cough, the one he does when he's clearing his throat before speaking. Our couch started vibrating. I know how that sounds, but I swear it's true. It would vibrate exactly 4 times in succession, just like a Samsung phone on vibrate mode. The first time it happened, I was sitting on it watching TV and nearly jumped out of my skin. I thought maybe Christopher had left his phone between the cushions, but we searched the entire couch and found nothing. This happened at least once a day, sometimes more. Then there were the air movements. I'd be cooking dinner and suddenly feel a breeze strong enough to blow my hair. Inside with all windows closed. Or I'd be in the shower and feel cold air rush past me in the completely enclosed bathroom. Sometimes I'd be working at my desk and papers would suddenly flutter as if someone had walked by quickly. Christopher was skeptical at first. He tried to find logical explanations for everything. Old building, weird air circulation, electronic glitches. But even he couldn't explain what happened with the Arby's sauce cup. One Friday night in March, we ordered Arby's delivery. Christopher loves their horsey sauce and always gets extra. When we finished eating, he threw the empty sauce cups in the trash. The next morning, I went into the kitchen to make coffee, and there was an Arby's horsey sauce cup sitting in the middle of the counter. Not just any sauce cup, the empty one from the night before, with the little tear across the top where Christopher had opened it. I called him in, and he swore he'd thrown it away. We checked the trash, and sure enough, the other sauce cups were there, but not this one. Christopher threw it away again, and we didn't think much more about it. 2 days later, I was feeding Max when I noticed something by his water bowl. The same Arby's sauce cup, now turned upside down, placed neatly beside Max's bowl. I felt sick to my stomach. I called Christopher immediately, and he came running. He picked it up, examined it, and confirmed it was the same cup. It had the same tear pattern. "This isn't funny," he said, looking around the apartment as if expecting to see someone hiding. He threw the cup away again, this time wrapping it in a paper towel before putting it deep in the trash. The next day, the sauce cup was sitting in front of our shoe closet by the front door. That was when we decided we needed to move. We started looking for a new place immediately, but rental markets being what they are, we knew we'd be stuck in the apartment for at least another month or 2. Things got worse after we made the decision to leave. It was like whatever was in the apartment knew our intentions and wasn't happy about it. The PlayStation would turn on multiple times a night. The couch vibrations increased in frequency and intensity. My work setup would power on almost every night at exactly 3:15. One night in early April, almost exactly a year after my accident, I woke up feeling like I couldn't breathe. There was a pressure on my chest, like someone was sitting on me. I tried to call out to Christopher, but no sound came out. I couldn't move my arms or legs. I was completely paralyzed, yet fully aware of my surroundings. That's when I saw it. A faint rainbow-colored glow emanating from the corner of our bedroom, the same colors I'd seen surrounding my car after the accident. The pressure increased, and just when I thought I might pass out, I heard a voice, not out loud, but in my head, clear as day. "Not yet," it said, and suddenly I could breathe again. I could move. The rainbow glow was gone. I shook Christopher awake and told him what happened. He held me while I cried, but I could tell he wasn't sure what to make of it. Was it sleep paralysis, a nightmare, or something more? We moved out 2 weeks later into a new apartment across town. We've been here for about a month now, and so far nothing strange has happened. No self-activating electronics, no phantom coughs, no mysterious breezes. But I'm still on edge. Every time the TV makes an unexpected sound or I feel a draft, I freeze, wondering if it followed us here. The thing that scares me most is not knowing what it was. Was it something attached to the apartment, or was it something attached to me since the accident? That rainbow I saw, both during the accident and in our bedroom that night, what was it? Protection or possession? I don't have answers. I'm writing this partly to warn others, partly to ask if anyone has experienced anything similar. All I know is that I survived something that should have killed me, and afterward, something came into our lives that I still can't explain.